Hi, I'm Sarah. James, can you pass me the blue blanket over there? I called out in our sunny, cheerful room that was going to be our baby's nursery. The walls were painted a calm pastel green, and there were cute animal stickers everywhere. James and I had spent weeks picking out everything from the crib to the mobiles, making sure it was all perfect. Here you go, babe, James said, handing me the soft blanket with a big smile. We were adding the final touches, feeling both nervous and excited. Do you think he'll like the stars on this blanket? I asked. He's going to love everything, James replied, smoothing the blanket over the little mattress. Can you imagine? In just a few weeks, we'll be here at 2 a.m., trying to get him back to sleep? James laughed and hugged me. As long as I'm with you, I can handle a few sleepless nights. The nursery was almost done. It was a labor of love, showing our journey into parenthood. The shelves were filled with storybooks, plush toys, and framed ultrasound pictures. It was perfect. The next day, after a doctor's appointment, I came home excited to add some new baby clothes to the dresser, but when I walked in, something felt wrong. The silence was too heavy. I dropped my bag and hurried to the nursery, my heart pounding. When I opened the door, I couldn't believe my eyes. The room was empty. Every single item we had picked out was gone: the crib, the blankets, the toys, even the pictures from the walls. It was like our dream for the future had vanished. I stood there, shocked, saying no, 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 as I looked around at the empty room. I rushed to the living room and found a note on the coffee table. It was from Carol, James's mother. My eyes scanned the note, each word making my stomach sink. Sarah and James, I've taken the liberty of donating your nursery items to a charity. There are many people who have nothing, and I know you can easily replace these things. It's for a good cause. You'll understand one day. Love, Carol. Understand? How could I understand? I crumpled the note, my mind racing with disbelief and anger. How could she do this? How could she think it was okay? When James came home, I was pacing, still clutching the crumpled note in my hand. He froze when he saw my face, then his eyes shifted past me to the empty nursery. What happened, Sarah? Where is everything? Your mother happened, I said, shoving the note into his hands. As he read it, I watched his confusion turn to shock, then to anger. This isn't right. She can't just decide this for us. James crumpled the note too, his jaw tightening. She had no right, none at all. We spent the rest of the evening in turmoil. Our joy was gone, replaced by the feeling that something precious had been stolen from us. The nursery, once a place of dreams, now felt cold and empty, a painful reminder of what was taken. We need to talk to her, James. This can't continue, I said, my voice steady with determination as I grabbed my phone. She needs to understand she can't just interfere like this. As the phone rang, my resolve grew stronger. This wasn't just about the baby items, it was about respect. Respect for us, for our new family, and for the choices we made. I was ready to fight for that. After 2 rings, Carol answered. Hello? Carol, we need to talk about what you did with our nursery, I said, my voice firm and direct. Oh, hello, dear. Yes, I was just about to call you. I dropped off the nursery items at the charity this morning. They were so grateful, you know. Carol, why didn't you ask us first? That was for our baby. You took everything, I said, my words sharp with hurt and disbelief. There was a pause. I did it for a good cause. Sarah, you can always buy more stuff, can't you? That's not the point, Carol, James chimed in, his voice just as firm. Those were our choices, our preparations for our child. You had no right to make that decision for us. Carol sighed on the other end, her tone dismissive. James, when you see the bigger picture, you'll understand. There are so many families who have nothing. We're blessed, and we should help where we can. I thought you'd be proud. I'm not proud, Mom. I'm hurt. You crossed a line, James said, his frustration clear. I know you're upset, but you're overreacting. You can easily replace everything. I just thought it was wasteful to let all those new things sit there when others could use them now. You can set up the nursery again, Carol said, her voice steady, as if she was convinced she'd done the right thing. That's not your decision to make, Carol, I snapped, anger surging through me, gripping the phone tighter. You've taken something from us that we can never get back, the excitement and joy of preparing for our child. How can you not see that? There was a long silence on the other end before she finally responded. Sarah, James, I did what I thought was best. If you're this upset over a few items, I'll help you replace them, but I won't apologize for helping those in need. That's not what this is about, Carol, I replied, shaking my head even though she couldn't see me. It's about respect and boundaries. James took a deep breath, sounding exhausted as he spoke, more to himself than to his mother. We'll talk more about this later, Mom. Right now, we need some space. As we hung up, the air between us felt thick with tension. It wasn't just about the missing nursery items. It was about the deeper issue of our feelings and choices being completely disregarded. James, what are we going to do? I asked, feeling drained. How do we make her understand? We set boundaries, Sarah, clear, firm boundaries. It's the only way, James said, his voice resolute, as if he'd made up his mind. That night, we sat down and wrote a letter to Carol, carefully outlining our feelings and the boundaries we needed to establish. It wasn't just about the nursery, it was about declaring our independence as a family. We valued her as part of our lives, but we couldn't allow her to overstep the way she had. We need to make sure this never happens again, for our sanity and for the well-being of our family, I said, sealing the envelope. Yes, James agreed, taking my hand, for our family. In this emotionally difficult time, we found comfort in the support of others. James made the first call to his Aunt Susan, who had always been a strong presence in our lives. His voice was hesitant but hopeful. Hey, Mom, he began, speaking to his aunt as we both sought a way forward together. We had a bit of a situation at home, James explained. It's about the nursery. Susan's response was immediate and full of empathy. Oh, you two must be devastated. What can I do to help? Her kind words felt like a balm, and soon, our community began to rally around us. Friends and family didn't just offer sympathy, they showed up with real support. Baby items started arriving, some brand new, others lovingly handed down, each with its own story and meaning attached. One afternoon, our neighbor Linda, whom we had barely spoken to before, arrived with a beautiful hand-knit blanket. I heard what happened, dear, she said, her eyes soft with understanding. I wanted to give you something made with love, something that can't be taken away so easily. James and I spent our evenings sorting through the items, each piece not only helping to rebuild the nursery but also healing our spirits. The response from our community was overwhelming, each act of kindness weaving a tapestry of support that held us up during this challenging time. We're so lucky to have people who care about us, James murmured one evening as we set up a new crib, donated by my cousin Ellie. I know, I replied, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. It's amazing how much love there is around us. The nursery slowly came together again, different from the first, but filled with even more love, if that was possible. One Saturday, we invited everyone who had helped us to a small barbecue in our backyard to express our immense gratitude. The afternoon was filled with laughter, stories, and the smell of grilled food. As children played in the yard, Ellie came up to me with a plate of food, smiling. How are you holding up, Sarah? She asked. I looked around at the gathering of friends and family. Better now. It's hard to stay down when you have this much support. That's what family and friends are for, she said, giving me a gentle hug. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, James and I stood side by side, watching our loved ones. This network of support hadn't just helped us rebuild the nursery, it had strengthened our relationships with the people who cared about us. It's like we're getting a second chance, James said, squeezing my hand. Yes, I agreed, leaning into him. And this time, it's built on the strength of all these wonderful people behind us. The emotional strain from Carol's betrayal had been real, but so was the power of community. As we prepared once again for the arrival of our baby, we knew that no matter the challenges ahead, we had a circle of love and support that would always carry us through. The energy in our home had shifted. The nursery was once again filled, not just with baby essentials, but with the warmth and love of our extended family. Yet James and I both knew that to truly move forward, we needed to address the root of the issue, Carol's intrusion into our lives. One quiet evening after dinner, we sat down to talk. James and I sat down to discuss what to do next. We can't let this happen again, Sarah, he said. We need to set boundaries that Carol will understand and respect. I agreed, feeling the weight of the decision. I agree. It's about protecting our family and our peace. Together, we made a list of boundaries and the consequences if they were crossed. It was important to make sure our family's space and decisions were respected in the future. The next day, we invited Carol over, hoping to explain our new boundaries calmly. When she arrived and sat down, James started, Mom, we need to talk about what happened with the nursery and how we move forward. Carol smiled, probably thinking this was a friendly chat, but her smile faded as James continued. Sarah and I have decided to set some boundaries. We need our family space and decisions to be respected. I spoke next, keeping my voice steady despite my emotions. We appreciate your intentions, Carol, but in the future, we need you to ask us before making decisions that affect us or our home. It's important for our peace of mind. Carol looked confused. But I was just trying to help. I don't see why there need to be such strict rules between family. It's not about rules, Carol, I replied. It's about respect. Carol sighed and shook her head. I think you're overreacting. I haven't done anything wrong. James's tone was firm. Mom, whether you think it was wrong or not isn't the point. It hurt us and broke our trust. We're setting these boundaries to keep our relationship healthy. Carol seemed like she might argue, but then she just nodded. If that's what you need, I'll try to respect it, though I still think it's unnecessary. After she left, there was a tense feeling in the air, but also a sense of clarity. James and I knew where we stood, and we were united. In the weeks that followed, as we prepared for our baby's arrival, our bond grew stronger. Every decision and preparation was made with mutual respect and care. It wasn't just about setting up a home for our child anymore, it was about building a strong, united front as parents. We're doing the right thing, aren't we? I asked. We're doing the right thing, aren't we? James asked one night as we reviewed everything again. Absolutely, I assured him, my hand resting on my growing belly. We're making sure our son comes into a world where his parents not only love him but also stand up for what's right. The nursery was calm, bathed in the soft afternoon sunlight. I rocked gently in the new glider, my eyes taking in the vibrant murals and shelves stocked with books and toys, each a symbol of the community's love and our own determination. Holding our baby boy in my arms, the troubles of the past felt both distant and defining. James placed a gentle hand on our son's head, his face showing a mix of wonder and deep thought. Can you believe we're actually here? He whispered. I smiled, looking around the serene room. It feels like a dream, but I know the journey to get here was very real. We went through a storm that tested our strength and taught us what it means to be a family. Reflecting on the situation with Carol, it was clear how much it had influenced our approach to relationships and boundaries. It's strange, I said aloud, how such a painful experience led us to a place of strength. Setting those boundaries with your mom was hard, but it feels right. James nodded thoughtfully. It taught us how to protect what's important and stand up for our family. I think it's made us stronger, not just as a couple, but as parents. As the day turned to evening and the first stars appeared outside the nursery window, James and I shared a quiet moment of gratitude. We were thankful for the challenges that taught us, for the community that supported us, and for the future we were ready to embrace as a united and strong family. And that's the end of our story, folks. I'd love to hear from you. If you were in Sarah and James's shoes, would you have set the same boundaries with Carol or handled it differently? This situation really tests the balance between family ties and personal autonomy.
I'm sorry, darling, mumbled Neil, shifting from foot to foot. Look, I've been on the road all the time. How should I know what you were doing and who you were meeting? Any man would have such thoughts. You've completely lost your conscience, Neil. Kate exploded in anger. You want to make up and start singing the same old tune that led me to file for divorce. Get out of my place. I'm sick and tired of your whining and stupid accusations. You shouldn't have married me if you always doubted my decency. Leave and never come back. With a face burning with anger, Kate threw open the door and pushed her ex-husband onto the staircase. It all started many years ago when Neil, a long-haul trucker, often heard various stories and indecent jokes about cheating wives from his more experienced colleagues. Neil began to wonder what his young and beautiful wife Kate was doing in his absence. Despite all his suspicions, each time he came back, he found a clean house, delicious homemade food, freshly ironed clothes, and healthy, well-groomed children. The couple had 3 little sons, so Katie had plenty of care for them. Bathing, feeding, taking them out, walking with them, and doing activities with them after kindergarten. Neil came home one day to find his wife patiently teaching their middle son, Leonard, how to read syllables. Exhausted, she turned to Neil and asked, "Neil, can you try? I'm out of energy." "If they were like me, there wouldn't be any problems," Neil sarcastically replied. "What are you trying to say?" "I have always studied with honours. I just don't know how to teach them. I'm not a teacher." Kate was offended. "I'm not talking about teaching." Neil looked annoyed. "Maybe they're so unintelligent because they're not my sons." "What did you say? You wretch!" Kate's face turned pale, then deep red. "I said what you heard." Neil raised his voice. Kate watched his distorted face and bulging eyes in a daze. "Who do you spend your time with when I'm on the road? Couldn't you have picked someone smarter as a lover, so that the kids could at least think better? You probably chose someone who looks like me, so I wouldn't doubt my paternity. Who is he?" His wife approached him and said in a calm tone, "You chose the wrong topic to practice your blatant idiocy. Truly, you will become like those you associate with. Congratulations. You've accumulated so much dirt from your friends that you'll have to live with it. You know, I won't tolerate it. I'm going to visit my parents now, and you should think about your behavior and words. I swear I won't listen to your disgusting insults about things I've never done." Neil's confident voice instantly cooled. But as they say, you can't take back what you've said. No matter how much he apologized, no matter how much he followed Kate around, she stayed persistent and began packing. Realizing that his wife wasn't going to forgive him, Neil returned to his usual insulting tone. "You are leaving? So I wouldn't catch you with your lover?" Kate, who was carrying a suitcase with the children's things into the hallway currently, flared up with anger. Setting her suitcase down, she walked up to her husband and looked at him with a cold, disdainful gaze from head to toe. "Be happy, dear. You no longer exist for us," she replied, called her sons, and started walking down the stairs to the waiting taxi. As soon as they were out of sight, Neil ran out to the balcony and began greedily watching. Would any men come to help Kate? However, she managed all by herself, and now he was alone in his apartment. At first, Neil was happy to finally relax from the constant noise and chaos in the house. He watched TV at full volume until 3 a.m., played video games, and enjoyed the peace and quiet. He was sure that Kate herself would crawl on her knees and beg for forgiveness and prove her innocence. But he had no idea that she had finally filed for divorce. This conversation became the last straw that filled her cup of patience. Besides, she did not apply for child support, so that in the future Neil would not hope for anything from their sons when they grew up. Time passed, and one day Neil returned from a trip to discover that someone had robbed his apartment, taking all the electronics and hidden savings. The thieves were not found, and Neil realized that something had to change. He decided to get married to that someone who would be at home to watch over everything. He didn't have to look for a bride long. Charlize, a local woman a little older than Kate, who had never been married, had been eyeing him for a long time. She was very attractive, and soon after spending a few nights with her, Neil proposed to her. Neil thought Kate would be upset to hear that he got married, but she was not in the mood to torment herself with jealousy or suffering over her ex-husband. The woman actively pursued a new profession to give her sons a good education and help them enroll into university after school. The older son, Ron, who was lucky to be born during a period when his father did not have any soul-poisoning suspicions of his wife's infidelity, loved him and often called him, telling about what was happening in their lives. Therefore, Neil knew that Kate had not started a relationship with anyone. Instead of trying to find common ground with his ex-wife, Neil only spoke ill of her. That's it. Who needs her? Who would want to deal with such a cheater? Charlize gave birth to a son, but Neil, like in his first marriage, did not feel a special love for him. Soon he heard rumours that Kate had bought a house. Neil didn't like this news. He wondered where she got the money, thinking that some boyfriend must have given it to her. However, André explained that her uncle, who had been living abroad for the last 20 years, left a large inheritance to his beloved niece. It was with this money that Kate was able to buy her own house and start her own business, which began to bring her a decent income after 2 years. Neil continued to live with Charlize without any pleasure, and, with some nostalgia, remembered his first wife. Kate, practically, did not burden him with any household work, and he lived more for his own convenience, not helping her in any way. But Charlize demanded that he do the cleaning, help with dinners, take care of their son, so that she could rest and sleep. 18 years had passed. Returning home from another long trip, Neil did not notice a sign about road repairs and drove on. What happened next he remembered very vaguely: a crash, a rumble, and a plunge into darkness. Through the fog, he heard the doctor telling Charlize, "We're taking him to surgery. He may need a blood donor because he has a rare blood type. If your son's blood type is AB and he has no health problems, donate blood just in case." It soon became clear that his son from Charlize had a blood group O, which couldn't have happened with his blood type AB. Neil was shocked, but he had no energy to think it through. He asked to inform his sons from his first marriage, and an hour later, Ron arrived at the hospital, and he had just the right blood type. When the other sons also came to the donor station, they all had the needed blood group, which came as a surprise to Neil. Now he understood that his foolishness had destroyed his family and insulted a woman who had sacrificed her career and everything else to make his life easier. After being discharged from the hospital, Neil returned home, but couldn't enter his apartment. Suddenly, a huge man who looked down at him with an unkind look opened the door. "What do you want?" he asked threateningly. "This is my apartment and I live here with my family," Neil protested. "Charlize, come here. Your ex seems clueless," said the stranger. Neil felt that he could not breathe. At the sight of him, Charlize made a disgruntled grimace. "What are you doing here? You gifted this apartment to me and our son, so that Kate's children wouldn't make any claims on it. So get out of here. Go wherever you want. By the way, I've already filed for divorce." "What about our family?" Neil stammered, feeling lost. "There is no our family," Charlize slyly smiled. "There's me, my Paul, and our son. You're not a part of our family. You can gather your things and go in any direction you want." Neil left with his belongings and sat on a bench near the entrance, quietly crying. He felt sorry for himself and wondered where he was supposed to go. As if listening to his thoughts, his son called. After hearing about his father's misfortune, he talked to his mother and persuaded her to accept her ex-husband, at least for a while. With a heavy heart, Kate agreed, but only for the time of Neil's recovery. She gave him a room in her large house, and almost everything was as it had been in those days when there was no thought or talk about any divorce. The difference was that now Kate was sleeping in a separate bed and demanded distance, dictating her own rules now. When Neil fully recovered, he decided to talk to his ex-wife heart to heart, secretly hoping that she would suggest that they live together again as husband and wife. However, Kate didn't think it was necessary to dig up the past, which began to anger Neil. "Why did you refuse to take the DNA test when I offered it to you?" he asked instantly, trying to unsettle Kate. "Why? You were my first and only man, and the father of our boys could only be you." "Who and what did I have to prove?" Kate replied. "Couldn't you understand that it was important to me? It would have been a simple act of support for your beloved husband." Neil continued his favourite topic. Kate calmly got up from her chair and walked into the room that used to belong to her ex-husband. The sons, who were at that moment home, stared at their mother in surprise as she slowly packed Neil's few belongings into a large suitcase. When she finished, she returned to Neil. "What are you trying to achieve from me now? Do you want to accuse me of deciding to divorce you? If you want to know, it was the best decision of my life. You always knew that you were wrong, but you still accused me of infidelity. You've already recovered fully, so do me a favour and disappear from my life forever. I don't owe you anything." At that moment, Neil was a pitiful sight. His lower lip trembled, his face grew pale, and his eyes showed genuine fear. He looked towards his sons as if asking for their support, but they responded with cold glances. "During all these years, Dad, you never came to see us or even asked how we were doing. Yes, in the hospital and afterward, we helped you, because your life had been depending on it. But now you are on your own, and we are on our own, just as we were before." Neil had nothing to say. He had to leave the house and his sons' lives, spending the remaining years alone and realizing his own guilt before the people who once loved him.
Mr. Parker went down the stairs to the basement and unlocked the door with a big old key. As the flashlight cast dancing shadows of cobwebs on the wall, it looked as if tiny magical creatures were dancing. Suddenly, little Samantha became scared, closed her eyes, and hurried after her grandfather. "What's in here, Grandpa?" she asked, frightened and amazed. The old man pushed aside an old horse harness that had been lying there for who knows how long and shuffled his feet, heading towards the wall. "Here," he said, turning to Samantha. "Do you see that spot on the wall?" Samantha held up the flashlight and saw that there was indeed a yellowish spot on the grey wall. Her grandfather scratched at the spot with his nail, and Samantha realized that it was clay. "Something is hidden here," the elderly man said. "Don't tell anyone about it. Understand?" "What's hidden there, Grandpa?" she asked. "And why can't we tell anyone?" The elderly man smiled. "There's a treasure here," he whispered in her ear. "An old treasure left by the former owners, the nobles. When the army came to the village to free everyone, they began to hide their treasure. They were very greedy for their treasures. When my time comes and I'm gone, and you grow up, you'll need money," the elderly man concluded, looking at the spot on the wall. "This treasure will help you stand on your own 2 feet." Mr. Parker picked up the hammer lying on the table, swung it, and then changed his mind about hitting it. He put the hammer down and smiled at his granddaughter. "Well, let's go, Samantha. In general, you should keep quiet about this." "Understood." Samantha nodded. "I understand," she said. "I promised not to tell anyone." Mr. Parker stroked Samantha's tousled chestnut hair and led her out of the basement. When Samantha returned, she found her mother, Helen, sitting in the yard under a spreading apple tree. The woman was reading a book, swatting mosquitoes from time to time. She wore a black mourning veil on her head, and her early grey hair stood out from under it a little. Samantha approached her and sat down next to her. "How is Grandpa doing?" her mother asked, not looking up from her book. "Is he feeling okay?" Samantha shrugged. "Seems like it," she replied, "but he's a little sad, just like you." Her mother put down her book, turned to Samantha, and pinched her nose. "Don't pay attention to that," she said, sighing, and began reading again. Samantha understood everything. She was sad too. Not long ago, she found out that her father had died while working somewhere far, far away, and she would never see him again. Her mother told her that her father had gone to a better place now, and that he was happy there. But Samantha did not believe it. Every night, she awoke to the sound of her mother crying softly in the darkness and silence of the kitchen, and Samantha began to cry watching her as well. The only thing that kept Samantha's anxiety and endless sadness at bay was the anticipation of starting school. In just 2.5 months, she would be going to first grade and sitting behind a desk while a young teacher taught her everything she knew. And there would be other kids there too, of course, and Samantha would get to know them. Samantha's best friend was the neighbor boy, Willie. They were always together, playing ball, sneaking into other people's gardens, and flying kites. Willie had one flaw that Samantha tried not to notice. He was born with a short right leg, so when he ran or walked, his leg couldn't keep up with him, and he had to hop, throwing his right leg forward. But otherwise, he was no different from the other kids. He rode his bike just as well as anyone else, or went fishing. So Samantha never reminded him of his ailment. The summer days flew by quickly, and before she knew it, the mint-scented July had passed, and the starry August was coming to an end. The mother was getting Samantha ready for school, and they went shopping together in the city. Samantha got a backpack full of notebooks, stationery, and most importantly, a school uniform. She often took a strict but beautiful dress out of the wardrobe, spread it on the bed, and carefully examined every stitch. And in early September, Chris appeared at Samantha's and her mother's house. He was a tall man of about 30, the same age as Helen. "I'm here because of your late husband," Chris said, entering the house. He greeted Samantha and Helen, sat on a sofa in the living room, and took off his backpack from his shoulders. "Here are his things," he said, pulling out a paper bundle. "I thought it would be better if they got to you." He handed the bundle to Helen, and when she unwrapped it, Samantha saw her father's wristwatch, comb, phone, and wallet inside. Helen opened the wallet, and a yellowed photograph fell out. "That's me and my husband on vacation," Helen smiled sadly, nodding at the picture. "Ben loved taking me to resorts. He never spared any money for that." The woman looked at the image of her husband with teary eyes and put the card back in his wallet. "Thank you," she turned to her colleague. "Did you know him well?" Chris lowered his head and remained silent for a long time, examining the floor. "He died in front of my eyes," he said finally, not raising his eyes. "I saw him fall into the river." Helen waved to Samantha. "Go for a walk, sweetheart," she said. Samantha hesitated for a moment, then went out the door and pressed her ear to the lock. Ben was pushing logs into the river when he stumbled. Samantha heard Chris' quiet story. He slipped and fell into the water. And then Chris paused for a moment. And then all the logs flew down right on him. And I saw his eyes at that moment. Oh, what a terrible look he had then. The logs covered him, and I didn't see him anymore. The divers never found his body. Chris spoke again. Maybe the current took him away, or he got stuck in some pit at the bottom. He sighed abruptly, as if catching his breath after a long run. And these things survived because they were in his jacket, which was left on the shore. Samantha pressed her ear harder against the lock, hearing her mother's quiet sobbing. She felt so sad, so unbearably heavy, that she cried, sitting down on the floor by the door. Soon the school that Samantha had been waiting for finally began. Every day, she went to school wearing her brand new fancy uniform. For reasons Samantha did not understand, Chris never seemed to be in a rush to leave. Whenever Samantha returned home from school, she found him sitting with her mother in the kitchen, quietly talking and laughing about something. One day, While Samantha's mother and Chris were watching TV together, Samantha asked, "Mom, is Chris going to live with us now?" Chris looked at her, called her over, and sat her on his lap. "And what about you? Are you against it?" he asked, looking straight into Samantha's eyes. "Don't you like me?" Samantha didn't know what to say. She nervously played with the edges of her dress and searched for an answer in her head. "So, you'll be my dad?" she asked. After much deliberation, both Chris and her mother burst out laughing in response. Smart beyond her years, Chris told her mother. "Just like Ben," answered Helen. Time passed and Chris never left. Samantha came to accept that he would always be there with them. Before Christmas, Chris went away for a couple of days and came back with many things. Samantha was fascinated by the gun, traps, the head of a moose with huge antlers, and other hunting paraphernalia that he brought. "Oh, who's this?" exclaimed Samantha when Chris, coming home from the street, pulled out a small woolen ball from his pocket. The ball squeaked, jumped up on its tiny legs, and ran to Samantha. "This is Rex," Chris said, stroking the puppy. "I'll take him hunting." Rex squeaked, licked Samantha's finger, and became quiet. Samantha took him in her arms and rocked him like a baby. 4 months later, Rex had grown a little, but it turned out that he was not suitable for hunting at all. Rex was difficult to train. He didn't understand commands, ran around the house, not seeing or hearing anyone but himself. Chris often got angry with him and pulled hard on the leash, hitting him with his hand on the back. Rex, scared, cowered like a hedgehog and whimpered, asking Samantha for help. "Don't hit him," Helen once said to Chris. "Why are you being so cruel? It will only make the dog worse. He'll get angry." Chris glared at her and hissed, "It's none of your business." Then, as if feeling guilty, he hastily added, "Sorry, I'm just so tired of this fool, and I have no strength." He waved his hand at Rex, who wouldn't respond to training, and spat, "Let Samantha deal with this glutton." Samantha, having received Rex as a peculiar gift, began to teach him in her own way. She taught the dog simple commands, rewarding him for every success with something tasty. Soon enough, Rex learned to sit, lie down, and bark on command from his little mistress. Willie taught the dog to catch mice. He showed him where their holes were, and Rex, digging with his front paws through piles of dry leaves, deftly used to catch the timid rodents hiding there. "They turned a dog into a cat," Chris said with annoyance, as Rex brought home another mouse he had caught. "It's a nature's mockery, not a dog." He took away Rex's trophy, disgustingly threw the mouse in the trash can, and kicked the dog. Rex, growling and snarling, crawled under the bed and only came out at Samantha's command. Years passed. Samantha finished elementary school, then middle and high school, and was already in her last year. Her grandfather had passed away, and Samantha often visited his grave to reminisce about the old days. She sat by the grave and thought about her upcoming adult life. What will she be when she finishes school? What will she do? Samantha didn't know and seemed to ask her buried grandfather for advice. The girl liked medicine and helping people, and wanted to go to the city to enroll in a medical school. She decided a long time ago that she would take biology and chemistry exams, and she will definitely pass them well to get into free-of-charge education. But she still needed extra money to live in the city, and so far she had no plan for where to get it. Her mother had been ill for a year and a half, and relying on her help was impossible because Helen needed help herself. Samantha didn't know whether to ask Chris for money. Frankly, she didn't like him at all. Chris was now too busy with his business, his small goat farm, in which he invested all his money and strength. His business was going somehow. He took out loans, negotiated with some investors, and bought various goats. But the goats gave so little milk that it would be easier to slaughter them. But Chris, with enviable persistence, was looking for a golden vein, some kind of phantom chance, and for it, he put money into his business like a furnace. Samantha sighed. Twilight had already thickened over the cemetery. Somewhere nearby, hidden from prying eyes by thick foliage, a nightingale was whistling. Loud beetles flew from tree to tree, buzzing like air fighters. Samantha stood up from the moss-covered bench and looked at her grandfather's grave once again. And then suddenly memories of a distant summer day flashed in her head when she followed her grandfather down to the dark basement of his house. Right before her eyes appeared a yellow spot on the wall, on which her grandfather swung the hammer and, smiling, told her about the events of the Civil War. Treasures. Samantha smiled. They were still there, inside the wall, behind a thin clay screen. She would get them out and put them into circulation as her grandfather wanted. And these treasures, after many years, would finally benefit her and society. Samantha stood over her grandfather's grave a little longer, then slowly walked along the path leading to the cemetery gates, trying not to stumble over the graves in the darkness. Entering the house, the girl took off her shoes and called out to her mother. There was no sound from the darkness that filled the house. Samantha went towards the couch, behind which was the switch. When she approached closer, she saw that her mother was lying sprawled on the couch, and one of her hands was hanging down. Samantha lifted her mother's hand and suddenly recoiled. The hand was as cold as ice. Samantha felt for the chandelier switch, clicked it, and when the room was filled with yellow light, the girl collapsed to the floor with an inhuman moan. On Helen's pale face, her wide-open eyes sparkled with a glassy gaze, and a terrible thought struck Samantha's brain like lightning. Mom had died. She sat next to the cooling body, laid her head on Mom's chest, and cried. After Helen's funeral, Samantha closed herself off. She felt alone in the whole universe. Her mom, dad, and grandpa had all died, and Willie went to study in the city. Chris didn't care about her at all. Samantha was waiting for the end of this terrible morning spring to take her exams and go where Willie was now. She immersed herself in her studies, which were her only lifeline, to forget the reality that tormented her soul. One day, when Samantha was sitting at the table and preparing for exams, Chris asked, "Listen, is it true what they say that there is a treasure somewhere in the village?" The neighbor blurted it out today, and before that, I heard it from old Bernard at the store. Do you think it's a lie or not? It was like a shock to Samantha. If Chris found out about this, he wouldn't stop until he found everything. And when he found it, he would definitely take the treasure for himself. It wouldn't be bad to find this treasure, Chris continued, screwing in a light bulb. I would buy those Scottish cows, you know, the ones with the long hair. He dreamily whistled, and his whistle cut through Samantha's ears. Nonsense, she replied, trying not to show her anxiety. What treasures could be here? Do we live in Treasure Island or what? Chris burst out laughing. People are much more inventive than you think, he squinted. Nevertheless, maybe there is something. Samantha, unable to bear it, slammed her textbook with a noise. I don't know, she blurted out. Look for it if you like, but without me. I have exams ahead of me. And Chris started looking. He asked neighbors, old-timers, casually, but listened to every word, recording every rumor. I heard that something was hidden in the basement of the late Mr. Parker, said Mrs. Blake, who lived on the next street. In his house, either an overseer or some merchant used to live, so he didn't want his gold to fall into the other hands. He buried it somewhere. Then Mr. Parker's father looked for it, searched, but never found it. Or maybe he did, who knows? Chris, hearing this, changed his expression. Thank you, Mrs. Blake. He thanked the elderly woman. An interesting story. My stepdaughter is writing a local history essay. It will be useful for her to know about this. He shook the elderly woman's dry hand and went home. As he approached the house, a predatory fire lit up in his eyes. Where did your grandfather hide the treasure? Chris yelled, grabbing Samantha by the shoulders. I know they're in his house. He didn't hand them over to the state or spend, did he? Samantha was frightened, sobbing, and shaking her head. I don't know, she exclaimed. I don't know anything about any treasures. It hurts me. She tried to break free from her stepfather's tight grip, but he clung to her as tightly as a hawk clings to its prey. You're lying, he hissed. Your grandfather probably hid them for you. Hurry up and tell me, or I'll make you." He waved his hand and slapped Samantha. From the burning cheek of the blow, tears sprang from her eyes. "I don't know," she insisted. "I don't know, you're crazy. You have an obsessive idea. You're insane." Chris became completely enraged by her words. He hit Samantha again, then grabbed her by the hair and dragged her out of the house and into the yard. "You'll stay here, you piece of trash," he hissed, dragging Samantha into the barn. "And while I search your grandpa's house for those damn treasures." Chris locked the door with a huge oak bolt, then shook himself, went back inside, and took the keys to Mr. Parker's house lying in a box. He put them in his pockets, went outside, whistling cheerfully, as if he had already found the treasure and was now fabulously wealthy. Chris searched every nook and cranny of Mr. Parker's house, but he couldn't find anything except junk and cobwebs hanging everywhere. He kicked a chair in frustration that got in his way. "It's okay, I'll come back here tomorrow," he reassured himself, and search everything again. When he returned home, he first went to the barn. "I didn't find anything," he said to Samantha, who was sitting where he had left her. "But it's okay, tomorrow will be another day, and the day after that, and the day after that. I'll keep looking, and you'll stay here. But if you decide to tell me where the treasure is, I'll let you out. So, what do you say?" "You're crazy." Samantha's voice came from inside. "You're sick. Let me go. I'm scared." She began to cry, and Chris kicked the door as hard as he could. "Scream all you want. No one will hear you," he said, and went home, leaving the barn door locked. Samantha sat in the darkness for an hour, 2, 3. She didn't know what time it was. She had no clock or phone. Sometimes she peeked through the cracks, but they were so small that it was impossible to see anything through them. Samantha tried to hit and shake the logs of the barn, but they were nailed down tightly, and none of them moved from her weak blows. Having tried all possible options for escape and realizing that they were all useless, Samantha helplessly dropped to the earthen floor and cried. She was so deeply immersed in her grief that she didn't notice how Rex crawled into the barn through a small hole in the corner and crawled up to her. "Rex," exclaimed Samantha when the dog nuzzled her face. "Rex, how did you end up here?" The dog, as if understanding her question, ran to the corner and stopped near the hole. Samantha tried to dig deeper into the pit, but without a shovel, it seemed impossible, and unfortunately, there were no shovels or other tools in the barn. Biting her broken nails, Samantha helplessly dropped to the floor and fell into an uneasy sleep. "Good morning," Chris's voice woke her up. "Here's some food." He slid a pack of dried noodles and a bottle of water under the door. Samantha eagerly grabbed the noodles, tore open the package, and a bit into the brick with her teeth. "Well, have you decided anything?" Chris asked her through the door. "Will you tell me where the gold is?" "I don't know anything," Samantha replied, her mouth full of noodles. "I need to continue my preparations for exams. Let me go." But Chris left her reply unanswered, and Samantha heard his footsteps receding. Samantha lost track of time and didn't know how long she had been in the damp darkness of the shed. Realizing she couldn't escape on her own, and there was no one to help her, she decided to reveal her grandfather's secret to her stepfather. "Let him choke on these treasures," she thought, stroking Rex. "I'll still put him behind bars for what he did." With a grim smirk at the thought of revenge, Samantha fell asleep again. In her dream, she saw Willie. They ran together through a field overgrown with flowers, while a hot July sunset was coming towards them. Birds chirped around them, and crickets played an incredible, soul-stirring melody. Willie shouted something, but Samantha couldn't make out the words and laughed. Rex barked upon hearing Samantha's laughter, but she didn't wake up. Meanwhile, in her dream, Willie called her Granny, and she reveled in his voice like music. When Willie shouted, "Hello, Granny," she woke up. She blinked, yawned, and then heard a muffled voice from outside the pine-bordered wall. "Have you arrived, my dear grandson?" The voice sounded muffled. "Yes, Granny, just 5 minutes ago." Samantha screamed. It was Willie's voice. She jumped up and ran to the pit. Rex's hole led to the street right where Willie's voice was coming from. She struggled to stick her head in the pit, and the same bright light hit her eyes. "Willie," Samantha shouted, not opening her eyes. "Willie, I'm here." The guy who was nearby ran up to her and sat next to her. "Hello," he breathed out. "What are you doing here?" Samantha, wiping tears from her eyes, told him everything. "Wait a minute," Willie said hastily, getting up. "Now, I'll free you." He clumsily climbed over the fence, limped to the shed door, and removed the bolt. Then he opened the door and called Samantha. "We need to run to Grandpa's house," Samantha whispered, hurrying Willie. "We have to get the treasure before he does." They rushed down the street, ignoring the passers-by who looked at them. Samantha pushed the heavy gates, burst into the yard, and rushed to the cellar. It was quiet and damp in the cellar, just like in a cave. Samantha took the old lantern hanging on the wall, clicked the button, and lit it, then slowly started to walk along the wall. When she reached the familiar room, she headed towards the grey wall in front of her. Seeing that the hammer was lying in the same place as it was 11 years ago, Samantha couldn't help but smile. Grandpa hadn't been there since then. Samantha fixated her eyes on a yellowish spot on the wall and grabbed a hammer. She struck the stain, and clay dust flew into her face, but she wiped it off and hit it again. After 5 hits, the clay barrier broke, revealing a small hidden compartment. Inside, Samantha found a bundle containing tangled chains, 10 gold rings, pendants, and crosses adorned with small stones, as well as a tiara, a brass crucifix, and pages from an old book that had turned green from age. Samantha admired her find for a few seconds, then wrapped everything back up and tucked the bundle under her shirt. When he met Samantha at the basement door, Willie said, "I called the police. Your stepfather won't be able to get away now." Samantha nodded and smiled. "I'm glad you came," she said. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't." Willie shrugged. "I'm surprised myself. It's good that I got sick and returned home." He laughed, and Samantha laughed too. That evening, they were sitting in Samantha's house. Her stepfather was being interrogated at the police station, and Willie asked Samantha, "What do you plan to do?" "I want to go to medical school to become a pediatrician, but I haven't decided for sure," Samantha replied without hesitation. Willie wrinkled his nose. "It's hard there," he said. Samantha giggled. "It's okay. I'm a capable student," she said, finishing her tea. "I want to sleep," she announced, yawning. The day was so complicated. Willie nodded and stood up. "Thanks for the tea," he said, buttoning his coat, "and for the cookies." He limped to the door, and Samantha hurried after him. "Wait," she called out, grabbing his hand. "Take this," she said, and placed on Willie's palm one of the rings she had found. Willie looked at her gift with surprise. "Wow," he said. "Thank you." He kissed Samantha on the cheek, and she, feeling his lips on her skin, grabbed his face with her hands and kissed his lips with her own. It was only now that she realized that Willie was more than just a friend. He was something bigger than just a boy from the neighborhood with whom she could have fun playing ball. Now they were grown-ups, and their childhood friendship had smoothly transitioned into adult love. Samantha knew for sure that they had a shared future ahead of them.
Rosalind woke up with an unusual feeling that someone was staring at her. Opening her eyes, she saw a rose petal on her pillow, and then another one. They weren't just petals, it was a whole bouquet of beautiful red roses. "Good morning," her husband Matthew said tenderly. "Happy anniversary, my dear." Their wedding took place 12 years ago. She was pleased that day, and all the following years too. Many wouldn't believe it. They would say, "It's a fairy tale, something you can only see in the movies." But Rosalind knew that happiness happened not only in the movies. Rosalind couldn't imagine her life without her husband Matthew and their son Henry. Her friends were always surprised at how she managed to maintain such a tender relationship with her husband after all these years. It's simple. Rosalind had an extraordinary, kind and loving heart that helped her to be happy. She met Matthew in college, and they had been together ever since. Matthew was 5 years older than Rosalind. The meek, skinny girl who had just graduated from school immediately won the heart of the young man, and in her last year of study, Matthew proposed to Rosalind. That's how their quiet family life began. They never fought, not even over small things. They cherished every day together, warmed by their love for each other. In an atmosphere of kindness and calmness, their son Henry was born. Recently, he had his first anniversary, 10 years old. Rosalind was so lost in her favourite memories that she didn't even thank her husband right away for the surprise. "Matthew, my dear, thank you. Happy anniversary to you too. I am happy to have you," Rosalind rejoiced. "And I'm happy to have you. Maybe we'll celebrate our holiday a little tonight?" Matthew asked. "Yes, of course, darling. I'll prepare a delicious dinner. Don't be late," Rosalind replied. After breakfast, Matthew hurried to work. Rosalind spent the whole day looking forward to a romantic evening and, of course, didn't expect what a thundercloud was looming over her. The clock was approaching 6, and Matthew was still not there. He was already half an hour late. The celebratory dinner was getting cold on the table. Rosalind was worried about what had happened. Maybe he was delayed at work? She dialed her husband's phone number for the 10th time, but there was no answer. "Mum, is Dad coming soon? I'm hungry," Henry asked, spinning around the table. "Sit down and eat, son," Rosalind replied. Henry happily started eating dinner. Another 15 minutes passed. "Thank you, Mum. It was delicious. I need to go now. I haven't finished my homework," Henry said. Rosalind was lucky with Henry too. He was a responsible and intelligent boy who studied on his own and got good grades. Finally, the sound of keys and the opening door could be heard. "Matthew, where have you been? I was worried. Did you get delayed at work?" Rosalind asked. "Yes, at work," Matthew replied, avoiding eye contact. Rosalind knew Matthew down to every detail, every mole, every emotion, and immediately sensed that something was wrong. Her husband was clearly upset. Rosalind decided not to pry and served dinner on the table. Matthew picked up his fork, but froze and said with a lost voice, "A woman from the town near our city died. I was with her many years ago when I was working after technical school. She was almost 15 years older than me. We had only 2 meetings. In short, I have a daughter, Jackie. She's 13. She has no relatives except me," Matthew explained. While Matthew was talking, Rosalind was in a daze. It seemed to her that someone else was telling her this story, and that she just happened to overhear it. Rosalind didn't try to figure out when this happened to Matthew, before or after they met. It was too painful. And what was the point if everything had already happened? The decision came naturally. She wouldn't lose her family under any circumstances. Matthew sat there dejected with his head down. He was very ashamed in front of Rosalind. He was afraid to break the silence, fearing Rosalind would not accept it and would leave. Suddenly, Rosalind's gentle hand rested on his palm. She looked into her husband's eyes and timidly asked, "Matthew, what are we going to do? We need to decide about the child." Although she already knew the answer, Matthew was kind and decent, and Rosalind had a premonition he would admit his daughter without a second thought and take care of her. "Rosalind, I will do a DNA test, and if Jackie is my daughter, I cannot allow her to live in the orphanage with a living father, Matthew replied. The word father painfully cut Rosalind. She couldn't bear the thought that Matthew, her Matthew, had once caressed another woman besides her, even if it was a long time ago, perhaps before she met him. I understand, Matthew. Go get her, Rosalind said barely audibly. She couldn't offer to go together, not yet. The next day Matthew left to get Jackie. Rosalind was restless, wondering how the girl who had just lost her mother would perceive her father. After the death of her closest person, she was probably overwhelmed with grief and fear for her own fate. Perhaps she would refuse to speak with her unexpectedly discovered father, and even more so with the woman who would now become her stepmother. That day, everything went wrong for Rosalind. Any work fell out of her hands, despite her love of cleanliness and comfort. A short call from her husband during the day was like an electric shock. Rosalind, we're coming tomorrow night. She had hardly slept all night. It wasn't easy to connect with a 13-year-old, but Rosalind hoped that love and tenderness, which were a part of her life, would help her navigate this difficult situation. Telling Henry was difficult. He was already 10 and understood everything. Rosalind couldn't think of a better way than to tell him the truth. Mom, don't worry. We'll live. We'll see. The main thing is that we're together. In the evening, Rosalind prepared dinner, and the delicious smells from the kitchen filled the air. Suddenly, the familiar sound of a key turning in the lock was heard. Trying to control her excitement, Rosalind went to the hallway. A confused Matthew was standing in the doorway, and next to him was a teenage girl with short hair, tattoos on her neck, and a nose piercing on the left side. Her clothes were no better, with a shapeless sweater, wide pants, and boots like soldiers. Rosalind didn't often encounter modern youth, as her Henry was not like that at all, so she looked at the girl in amazement. But that was just the beginning. So, you're my own stepmother. Why are you staring? Don't you like me? Are you going to teach me how to live? Don't try. I'm already educated, and you'll never be a mother to me. Matthew interrupted his daughter's rude speech. Jackie, stop it. You can't behave like that. Rosalind doesn't deserve such treatment. Apologize immediately. Instead, Jackie glared at Matthew and shouted angrily, Daddy, why did you bring me here? You'd better pay me some money. You kind of owe me alimony. Don't shout, you'll scare the neighbours. Come on, let's go eat, Matthew said. I don't want to eat. Where can I throw my stuff? And you, Dad, think about money until the morning. Jackie continued to behave arrogantly. Let's go. I'll show you your room, Matthew said, barely containing his righteous anger. Rosalind wrung her hands in despair and leaned against the wall. Rosalind, what's wrong with you? Matthew exclaimed when he saw his wife, who was as white as a sheet. Nothing. I just didn't expect this, she replied, flustered. Rosalind, let's go to the kitchen. I'll tell you everything about Jackie. She had a tough life. Rosalind was serving dinner on plates and barely holding back tears. Matthew, why did this happen to us? She said. Rosalind, if I had known about this earlier, everything could have been different. Jackie wouldn't have become so callous and rude. Her mother drank. She was practically an alcoholic. They didn't take away her parental rights, and the girl practically raised herself on the streets from the age of 8. Can you imagine what she turned into? Rosalind, I understand that she's not a gift. Of course I'll do a DNA analysis. But if it's confirmed that she's my daughter, I won't be able to just forget about her. Yes, it will be difficult with her, but my love will manage." Matthew smiled. "Yes, dear, of course." Rosalind hugged her husband around the neck. She was ready for anything to keep her family together, but she secretly hoped that Jackie was not Matthew's daughter. Unfortunately, her hope was shattered by the results of the clinic's DNA analysis, which confirmed Matthew 100% paternity. Practically all the burden of communication with Jackie fell on Rosalind. Her husband was at work all day, and Rosalind was running a private business. She was a budding designer and spent most of her time working from home. Communication, to put it mildly, was not easy. At first it consisted of a couple of rude words, rudely thrown at Rosalind. Jackie didn't touch her food. She snacked on pocket money that Matthew gave her somewhere and disappeared until late in the evening. When she returned without saying a word, she went to her room. Matthew tried to establish contact with Jackie. He decided that he would be able to do it more easily since he gave her money. But it was not to be. Jackie perceived the money as payment for the fact that her father was not with her for all 13 years of her life, and the fact that Matthew didn't know about her existence didn't bother her at all. No matter how hard he tried to show care and attention to his newly found daughter, she turned away and said nothing. The only thing he managed to do by hook or by crook was to save her mobile phone numbers in his and his wife's contacts. From the moment Jackie saw Rosalind, it seemed as if the girl hated her. However, Rosalind never gave up hope of getting closer to her stepdaughter. Rosalind firmly decided that she would achieve a good relationship with the girl. If not love, then at least respect, for her husband's sake. But so far, all her attempts, even to just talk to Jackie, have failed. They not only left Jackie indifferent, but also caused her to feel a wave of senseless irritation. Rosalind loved order, cleanliness, and everything had its own place. To annoy her, Jackie intentionally broke brooches, scattered trash around the rooms, or accidentally spilled coffee on the tablecloth. Rosalind endured these small annoyances stoically. Jackie's hatred only grew from this. She was rude to her stepmother. Matthew tried to stop it, but it was all in vain, and his initial positive attitude gradually faded. She didn't know what to do to improve his relationship with his daughter. He increasingly talked about getting rid of Jackie. "Maybe we should rent an apartment for her, and I'll help her with money." "Matthew, are you crazy? She's 13, and what will happen to her later? It's scary to think who she might become. We need to get her out of this state of unbridled impudence and cynicism. It's a pity that she spends most of her day somewhere, probably in bad company, but we still have to fight." And that's where Rosalind's steel character manifested itself. She set a goal for herself and wouldn't back down. "You're so brave and wise," Matthew admired his wife. Unfortunately, this bravery and wisdom didn't produce any results. Rosalind couldn't find a way to reach Jackie's heart. Quietly, calmly, and kindly, she tried to help the girl with everything: cooking, tidying up Jackie's things, giving her good gifts that she demonstratively refused. Rosalind never scolded Jackie. She always had a kind word, warming and encouraging. And if the girl really made her life unbearable, she sadly said, "Why do you do this, Jackie?" The situation was exacerbated by school. They had a hard time getting Jackie into a school near their home. But the girl became even more embittered and behaved despicably at school. Her father and stepmother were constantly summoned by the teacher and director. And then a terrible accident happened, compared to which the previous ones were nothing. On that day, as almost always, Jackie was scolded at school and got bad grades. She was in a terrible mood. She threw her bag in the hallway and, angry at the whole world, slumped into a chair. Rosalind ran out of the kitchen and asked, "Jackie, you're upset. What happened? Did you have a test? Let's go have lunch and you'll tell me." Suddenly the girl grabbed her bag, ran into the kitchen and angrily threw it on the dining table. Plates, cups and a pot of soup flew off the table, clattering and breaking, and Jackie, in a hysterical fit, grabbed the tablecloth and pulled it off. Rosalind rushed towards Jackie, attempting to hug her. "Jackie, calm down." However, in a fit of rage, Jackie bit her stepmother's hand until it bled. At that moment, Matthew came home. Jackie realized she had crossed a boundary and would likely face a beating for it. Shocked, she ran from the kitchen to the hallway, throwing on clothes as she went, and fled into the street. When Matthew walked in, Rosalind was bandaging her hand. Seeing her husband, she quickly made up a story. "Matthew, I'm sorry, but I had an accident. I got caught on the tablecloth and everything on the table fell to the floor. I broke many dishes. I'll clean everything up now." Matthew saw his wife's injured hand and the blood-soaked bandage and immediately understood what had happened. "Rosalind, don't lie to me. Did she hit you?" "I know she did. That's it. I've decided I'm going to give her up. I'll go to the orphanage on Monday," Matthew said. "Matthew, please, don't rush. Give me a little more time," Rosalind pleaded. "No, Rosalind. Today she hit you, and tomorrow, in a fit of nerves, she'll kill you." Matthew tenderly hugged and held his wife. "Matthew, it's so sad that it hasn't worked out. She's your daughter after all. Can you give her one more chance?" "No, Rosalind, she's only our daughter on paper. In reality, she hates us and will never overcome that wall of malice and treachery." Rosalind didn't know where to turn from her disappointment. Matthew is a man of his word, and when he decides, he never changes it. She couldn't melt Jackie's heart with tenderness and care, and that was a humiliating realization. She automatically prepared another dinner, but didn't feel like eating. When Henry entered the kitchen, he noticed that his mum was upset about something. "Mum, what happened? Jackie again?" he asked anxiously. "No, everything's fine, my dear," Rosalind reassured her son. He and Jackie were only 3 years apart, but it was like a whole chasm. What to do? Matthew was brave now, but he would regret giving up his daughter to an orphanage later. Rosalind suddenly remembered that her mother always told her that when there are insurmountable difficulties, one should turn to God. Her mother was a sincere Christian, and she instilled a love of God in her daughter too. "Lord, help me. I want to improve my relationship with Jackie. Why does she hate me? Is it just because I am a stepmother? I don't know what to do. I rely on you," Rosalind whispered, praying selflessly and to tears. She was so absorbed in prayer that she didn't hear Jackie return. However, a strange whisper and barely audible sobs caught the girl's attention. She approached quietly and listened. The prayer, she knew it from somewhere. Suddenly she remembered. Her grandmother always used to recite this prayer when she was little. Jackie loved it very much. It's a pity that her grandmother died when she was only 8. After that, her life became practically homeless. Rosalind prayed, and Jackie couldn't take her eyes off her. Suddenly, she felt the urge to approach her stepmother and apologize for her behavior earlier that day. But something stopped her. That inexplicable thing that sat like a splinter in her heart and prevented her from opening up to bright feelings. She rushed to her room and tightly closed the door. All weekend, Rosalind was depressed because of Jackie. "Don't be upset, Rosalind. We're doing everything right. Don't hope for anything more. I shouldn't have brought her. She didn't even apologise for her terrible behaviour when she hurt your hand." Matthew comforted his wife. "Don't make excuses for her terrible behaviour. She'll come back tonight, and tomorrow morning I'll take her away. And that's it." But Jackie didn't come back in the evening. For the first time, she didn't come back that evening, and not at night either. Only towards morning, Rosalind's mobile phone rang. "Rosalind, I'm freezing. I can't move. Come and get me," Jackie whispered faintly. "Where are you?" Rosalind asked anxiously. I don't know. Some abandoned, non-residential buildings on a construction site, not far from the city." The connection was lost. Rosalind unsuccessfully tried to call Jackie's number. "The subscriber is unavailable." "Matthew, let's go faster. Something's happened to Jackie. She says she's freezing, and it's the end of October now. It's cold outside." Rosalind was scared. Without hesitation, Matthew ran to the car, and 10 minutes later they were driving out of town. An abandoned building on a construction site. There were many such buildings outside the city, but they were lucky. Jackie was found in the first house they came across. Upon entering, they found her unconscious, with closed eyes, a pale face and blue lips. Later, at the hospital, the doctor said, "It was hypothermia. You found her just in time. She was on the verge of freezing to death. But she's young and strong and she'll recover. You can visit her tomorrow," the doctor said. The next morning, Matthew and Rosalind rushed to the hospital. When they entered the ward, Rosalind ran to Jackie and hugged her for the first time. "Jackie, what happened?" Rosalind asked. "Rosalind, forgive me for everything. You're the best. I've been on the street since childhood and I've become hardened. I've been offended by the whole world. I forgot that there's goodness, love, and care in life. I thought they no longer existed, like mammoths. And you're just pretending to be good in your husband's eyes. But yesterday, I heard you praying sincerely for me. It was so moving, like when my grandmother used to read prayers to me as a child. I wanted to come to you, but I didn't dare. Then I accidentally overheard what Dad wants to send me to an orphanage. I'd rather die than go there. That's why I decided to freeze, just fall asleep and never wake up. But I couldn't do it." Jackie was unable to speak any more. She was choked with tears. Everyone was crying. Jackie, Rosalind, and Matthew. The stepmother and her stepdaughter's standoff was over. With her kindness, Rosalind defeated the anger that had taken hold of Jackie's mind and turned her soul around. And the girl loved her because it was impossible not to. The main thing is that now they are together. They are one family. "May I help you?" "No, thanks, it's light." Marina quickly placed her bag on the top shelf and only then looked down at the man sitting in front of her. He was quite handsome, with a pleasant smile and intelligent blue eyes. The stranger appeared to be about 40, the same age as her. Nevertheless, this was not a reason for hasty introductions, especially since Marina did not want to talk to him. Maybe a few years ago she would have been happy to chat with such a man as her neighbour. But now she just wanted to sleep, to shorten the flight time. She couldn't wait to go home, where her beloved husband George was waiting for her. "Do you want to sit by the window?" the man asked. Marina gratefully smiled and nodded. She was not going to continue the conversation with her neighbour, despite his kindness, but he started talking again. "My name is Stephen, and you?" "My name is Marina," the woman said, and realizing that she could not avoid the conversation, continued, "My father was a captain of long-haul navigation and spent his whole life sailing the seas and oceans. My mother and I waited for him at home. He dreamed that he would have a boy who would also become a sailor, but I was born. That's why I was named that. But Marina didn't have time to finish because Stephen's phone vibrated instantly. He apologized and answered the call. "Yes, Mummy. Yes, don't worry, everything is fine with me. I'm already on the plane and can't talk for long. Of course, as soon as I land I will definitely call you back. Okay, Mum. Kiss you, hug you. I love you very much too." Finishing the conversation, Stephen smiled. "You probably think I am a classic mummy's boy. Don't apologize. I would have thought the same, although in reality everything is a little different. My mother has been living in Spain with my older sister for 5 years now. Recently, she had a jubilee, 80 years old, and I couldn't help but visit her, although I fly there twice a year anyway. I am a late child, so my mother is more attached to me than necessary, but you probably understand her. Is it inherent in all mothers?" "I don't have children," Marina said, turning away so that Stephen would not notice the expression on her face, and he, succumbing to an impulse, put his hand on hers. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be rude." "But at least you have your parents, and that means you're a child to them," Stephen said, but Marina looked him straight in the eye. "I don't have parents either. After the injury, my father had to forget about the sea and ships, but it was simply unbearable for him. On land he couldn't find himself, so he didn't live, but existed. It only lasted 2 years, but to him it felt like an eternity. He told me about it himself. Don't get me wrong, he loved us very much, my mum and me. He gave me a good start in life and helped me get a prestigious profession. But for someone who spent his entire life at sea, an ordinary, even wealthy life was a burden. After 2 years he had gone, and my mum couldn't accept it. She cried all the time and said that she was used to waiting for him, but now he is waiting for her." Marina sighed. "My mum outlived my dad by only 40 days, and her last words were, 'I don't want to make him wait.' She just faded away, like a candle in the wind." "Such a sad story," Stephen said. "I've never heard anything like it. Although after my father's death, my mum also never remarried, despite having admirers. She's charming, elegant and intelligent, even at such an old age." Marina nodded. "It turns out that our parents were lucky to have found the love of their lives and carried it through all these years." "Yes, I'm not like them," Stephen admitted. "I had been married for 7 years, but it ended in divorce. It was a peaceful divorce without mutual accusations and insults. We just went our separate ways. We didn't have children, and we each had our own property, so there was no problems." Marina smiled understandingly. "That's good when it's like that." She turned back to the window and fell silent for a long time, thinking about how she had never been lucky in love. Marina had been a withdrawn child since childhood, and her mother was largely to blame. The captain's wife saw the birth of her daughter as an opportunity to keep the family together, and she transferred her already strong love for her husband to their daughter. Helen surrounded Marina with such dense care that it completely deprived the girl of friends and a normal childhood. Marina never played outside, didn't meet boys, and never hung out with peers, except at school. All of her spare time, which was scarce due to the huge number of extracurricular activities, she spent at home with a book in her hands. She read a lot, immersing herself in the plot of the works and imagining herself in the place of the main heroines. She dreamed that one day she would have such an interesting life. Marina especially loved novels by Hugo, Dumas, Bronte, Scott, and other writers who depicted incredible, romantic love. In her mind, she painted a portrait of a handsome, strong, brave, and very gentle man who would one day conquer her heart. However, modern men were not like her favourite heroes, and behind their attractive appearance often hid small or petty souls. Marina fell in love for the first time while studying in her first year of university. Elliot was her classmate and the most ordinary rich kid who was not used to being refused, and Marina was precisely the one who hooked him by refusing to go on a date with him. Elliot was stunned, hearing the rejection from this beautiful but silent girl, not even realizing that she had almost died of embarrassment and delight when he invited her to take a walk. "Do you really not want to go out with me?" he asked, surprised. "I'm busy," the girl muttered. "I'm going to German class, and then I have solfeggio." "What's solfeggio?" Elliot's eyebrows raised. "Well, it's a class in music school. With these lessons you can develop musical memory and hearing," Marina explained, still feeling embarrassed. "And you really find that interesting?" "I don't believe it," exclaimed Elliot. "My mum wants me to be well-rounded. That's why she insisted on private music lessons." "Oh, I see. Moms are like that. Listen, have you ever skipped class?" Marina shook her head. "Then let's do it right now," Elliot suggested, taking her hand. Marina helplessly looked back at the classroom, filling with students. "They'll manage without us," Elliot laughed and decisively pulled her along. They spent the whole day together, trying almost all the rides in the park, having lunch and dinner at cafes, and even kissing in a dimly lit cinema, forgetting about the film they came to watch. When she finally got home in the evening, Marina, impressed by the day, fell onto the bed, and Elliot's image came to her mind again. He was kind, attentive, caring, and so handsome. Marina fell in love with him head over heels. Finally, she met him, her prince, and now she would be happy with him for the rest of her life. Even her mother, who watched her closely, couldn't do anything about her daughter's infatuation. Elliot had completely swept Marina off her feet, and so it was more painful for her to find out that she had trusted this handsome man in vain, because he quickly grew cold towards the naive girl after achieving what he wanted. He preferred clubs, countless one-night stands, car races through the city at night, wild parties with friends, and in the midst of his bright life, Marina seemed boring and dull to him. "Do you no longer love me?" she asked him one day, peering into his eyes with her own grey ones, beneath which shadows had appeared. "I've never loved you," Elliot replied with a smirk. "You made up this nonsense yourself." Marina shuddered, as if he had struck her. Elliot had expected her to throw a tantrum, to plead with him not to leave her, to confess her love. Instead, she simply turned and walked away, not even glancing back once. He never found out about her pregnancy, and no one, not even her mother, suspected Marina's secret. The girl found a doctor who helped her get rid of the problem. At that time, she didn't even know that she had permanently lost the chance to become a mother. Marina spent several days in bed after the operation, deceiving her mother with a common malaise. To avoid Helen bothering her, she said she had broken up with Elliot. This explained Marina's depressed mood, and her mother finally left her alone. Marina devoted herself entirely to her studies and paid no attention to Elliot anymore. She managed to get over him, but part of her soul remained forever scorched. Now, after so many years, Marina thought that she should have acted differently and kept the baby. Perhaps she should have left her family, because neither her father nor mother would have understood her. Maybe she should have given up her studies and even left town to avoid shame. However, Marina, who had grown up in hothouse conditions, was not equipped to face life's challenges, so she gave up in the face of difficulties. Why was she remembering all this now? Marina didn't know. In fact, she had never forgotten it and had never forgiven herself for her actions. After Elliot, she couldn't trust anyone for a long time, until Lionel appeared in her life. As it turned out, he was not looking for love, but for prosperity, which Marina could provide. She quickly realized this and broke up with him, receiving another scar on her heart. There were other men in her life, but all of them somehow disappointed Marina, and in the end she decided to stay alone. Now she was a successful businesswoman, conducting business not only in her country but also abroad, and often went on business trips. One day someone called out to her at the airport. She turned around and was surprised to see Elliot. "Marina, you look stunning. Where are you headed?" He couldn't hide his admiration. "To Japan." Marina was not happy about this meeting, but she looked at her former love with curiosity. Elliot's business was clearly not going well. He had gained weight, was unshaven, and his shirt was clearly not fresh. "And you?" she asked. "I'm not going anywhere. I work here," Elliot replied. "I see. Well, Elliot, sorry, I have to go." "Marina, maybe we could meet up?" She shook her head, like before, turned around and left. He stood there for a long time watching her go and thinking about how many years ago he missed the chance to be with this gorgeous woman. As if in reward for the newly experienced suffering, Marina met George immediately after returning from the trip. He worked as a system administrator and had recently arrived in her city. He approached Marina on the street to clarify the location of the address he needed. They started talking and decided to continue their conversation in a cafe over a cup of coffee. Longing for love, Marina trusted this feeling again, and it did not fail her. For several years now, she and George have been together and happy. Although Marina provided for her family, her husband endlessly showed her signs of attention, brought breakfast in bed, met her at home with a delicious dinner, gave flowers and small but pleasant gifts. Remembering this, Marina smiled, and Stephen noticed it and thought, "What a beautiful but sad woman." However, when she starts to smile, her face lights up like the sun. But when the plane landed, he couldn't resist and offered to exchange phone numbers with Marina. "I'm married." She shook her head and left, getting lost in the crowd. Marina didn't call George to warn him about her return, and was very surprised when she arrived home and saw him getting into the car with another woman. He leaned down to a stranger. Was it for a kiss? Or maybe just to adjust the seatbelt? Marina couldn't see what was happening in the car, but an unpleasant feeling overwhelmed her. George, not wasting any time, got behind the wheel and drove off without seeing his returned wife. Marina went up to the apartment and immediately noticed the mess. The bed looked as if someone had danced on it, and there were dirty dishes on the table, clearly set for two. Marina picked up the phone and dialed her husband's number. "Hey, honey!" exclaimed George. "How are you doing? I was just about to call you. Are you okay?" "Yes, and you?" Marina tried to sound calm. "I'm fine too. I just took a shower. I'm about to go to bed. I'm sitting on our bed and thinking about you." "No, George. It's me sitting on our bed." There was silence on the other end of the line. "Have you arrived? When?" George finally asked. "Just now. We missed each other outside. I saw you with another woman. George, can you explain what's going on?" "I'll be right there," he replied and hung up. Half an hour later he arrived and explained everything. "Marina, I have a son. That woman Isabel is her mother. I didn't know about him. She hid her pregnancy from me. Also, we were together only once before you. Recently she found me and started demanding money. Isabel and I have nothing between us. But the boy, I can't abandon him. He has some health problems. I'm renting a place for them and paying for his treatment." Marina understood, but didn't know how to react. After a few days, she demanded that George take her to Isabel and their son. "Okay," George agreed unexpectedly quickly. "I'll just warn Isabel. That's okay, right?" An hour later, Marina and her husband approached a door covered in dirty leather, and George pressed the doorbell. The doorbell was opened by a scruffy old woman in a greasy robe. "Come in," she nodded. "Danny's there. He's sleeping." Marina approached the couch, suffocating from unpleasant smells, and leaned over the small, skinny boy who was sleeping soundly. George stood beside her. "So, do you believe me now? Where's his mother? And who is this woman?" Marina asked. "Isabel went to get some medicine, and this is her mother. Do you want to know anything else? Because it's better to leave now and let Danny sleep." Marina headed for the exit, and the old woman hurried after her. "When are you taking him?" she asked. "We'll take him, but I need to talk to my wife first," George replied. The woman looked at him bewilderedly, but he had already left the stairwell. On the way home, Marina told her husband, "Tomorrow morning I'm leaving on a business trip for a couple of days, and when I come back, we'll take Danny to the hospital ourselves. Let him have a full examination. I'll pay for his treatment." "Thank you, my dear." George took Marina's hand and kissed her. "You're the best, and I love you very much." In the morning, Marina left without waking George. She didn't even suspect that she was seeing him for the last time. When she returned home from her trip, she was shocked to find the empty, ransacked apartment. George had stolen everything valuable that he could. Only the safe was beyond his abilities. He never learned the code. Marina grinned bitterly. The last night ran away. Well, I guess it's my fate to be a lonely princess. She decided to go to where Isabel lived because she was sure that George had gone to her, but the same old lady opened the door again. "Where are George and Isabel?" Marina asked him. "How should I know?" the dissatisfied old woman replied. "But Isabel's your daughter," Marina exclaimed incredulously. "Are you crazy?" the old woman snapped. "I have no one. And Isabel was renting an apartment across. Yesterday she left with her boyfriend George." "What about their son Danny?" Marina asked, unable to understand what was happening. "You are really insane. Danny's mother is my cousin's grandmother. We buried her a couple of weeks ago and Danny stayed with me. The guardianship promised to take him. I was glad because I don't need the boy. I'm old and sick. What can I give him? Yesterday Isabel came running, then saying that the guardianship would come and take him away now. And instead of the guardianship, you came." At that moment, a little boy appeared in the doorway and stared at Marina with huge grey eyes. "Do you have his documents?" Marina asked, feeling her heart skip a beat. She sat down in front of the little one and reached out to him, saying, "I'll be your mother from now on." The boy ran to her, tightly hugging her neck. With him in her arms, Marina wrote down her address so that the guardianship would know where the child was, then took his documents and, under the relieved sighs of the old woman, left. For a few days she got used to the idea that she would now have a son. She gave instructions to her lawyer to start the adoption process and began taking care of Danny. She took him to a children's hair salon, bought him clothes and toys, and made an appointment with a doctor. At the appointed time, Marina walked into the doctor's office with Danny in her arms and gasped when she saw Stephen. "I've been looking for you," he said, smiling. "Is this your son? You said you had no children, but you had a husband." "Now it's the other way round," Marina replied. "I no longer have a husband, but I have a son, and I'm so happy about it." Danny turned out to be perfectly healthy, albeit emaciated. But under Stephen's watchful eye, he quickly recovered, and Marina was truly grateful to him for that. A year passed. Marina and Stephen were married, and Danny was their beloved son. The boy paid them back with boundless love. One day, while having breakfast, Marina turned on the news and saw a familiar face, her ex-husband George. He was caught up in some fraud and now faced a serious sentence. Marina shook her head. Everyone chooses their own path in life, and fate itself punishes or rewards people for their actions. "Please hurry," a woman shouted into the phone, calling the ambulance. "My son has stopped breathing. He's so little. Please hurry. Help. Please help him. I beg you." "Please give me the address," said the dispatcher on the other end of the line. "Please stop crying and tell me your name, your child's name, and where you live. The faster you calm down and give me your address, the faster the ambulance will come to you." "Tobias, his name is Tobias," said the distraught mother, giving the address but continuing to sob and beg for the ambulance to come quickly. The dispatcher quickly passed on the information to the ambulance. "The child is not breathing," shouted Neville to the driver, and they rushed to the specified address. 5 minutes later, the ambulance stopped and the driver opened the door. "We've arrived. This is the entrance." He waved at the grey steel door. Neville and Charles hurried inside without hesitation. Fortunately, an old woman came out of the entrance and held the door for them, telling them which floor they needed. Neville pressed the doorbell, and the door immediately opened. "Where is your son?" Neville asked, entering the hallway. Charles followed close behind. "There, in the nursery." The woman waved her hand at the door and fell into a chair, crying and hiding her face in her hands. The baby lay on the couch, covered with a blanket almost to his head. Only wet strands of dark hair were visible on the clean, light green pillow. "Tobias?" Charles called softly and touched the child, but then pulled his hand back and almost screamed. At first, he thought they had come too late. The baby wasn't moving and was frozen. But when Neville pulled the blanket off him, both doctors almost turned grey, realizing that they were looking at an ordinary doll, a life-size boy. He looked like he could be 2 years old, no more. It was made very realistically, and it was quite possible that it was a custom order. "Talented handmade work," Neville said, examining the toy child's rosy, chubby cheeks. From the adjacent room came the sobs of a woman who called herself a mother. "What should we do?" asked Charles. "First, we need to inform that the call, thank God, is false. At least that's good," answered Neville. "Okay, then you call them while I'll go see the inconsolable mother." "Charles, be careful there. You never know what's on her mind," warned Neville. "Oh, Neville, come on. She's so young. 25 years old at most, or thereabouts," replied Charles, and went out to the crying woman. Meanwhile, the grieving mother got up from her chair and rushed to him. "How's my baby? Is he alive?" "Calm down. He's not in danger. Let me take your details and we'll pass them on to our colleagues. They work more in this area and will provide you with timely and necessary assistance. What's your name?" From what he said, the woman only heard that Tobias was not in danger and his question about her name. "My name is Madeline, and my son Tobias. He's a good boy, quiet, calm, obedient, and I was so scared when I realized he wasn't breathing." "Everything will be fine. promised Charles, and the woman went to where Neville was. She hugged the doll and suddenly looked at Neville in surprise, then turned her gaze to Tobias. "My son is a doll?" she asked incredulously. "Where is my son? Where did you take him?" "There was a doll on the bed, not a boy. Where did you buy it?" asked Neville. "Where did I buy?" She repeated the question, and her face suddenly distorted with a grimace of pain. "Yes, I bought him. I forgot. I thought he looked like my missing son." The woman covered her face with her hands and burst into bitter tears. "Okay," said Neville. "Now, you are speaking about your missing son. Okay, we understand, Madeline. You need to come with us. We'll help you. Where's your passport?" Madeline obediently complied with the doctors and did everything they asked. She no longer cried, and only tears quietly rolled down her cheeks, leaving 2 wet trails. Neville and Charles returned to the car. Listening to their conversation, the driver turned out on the yard and headed for the hospital. Realizing what had happened, he shook his head. Poor woman. She must have wanted a baby so badly. That's why she couldn't handle the suffering. "But maybe she never had children," said Neville, sighing. "I also doubt that someone stole her son," said Charles. "Who would do that and why? She's not rich and can hardly pay a good ransom. She lives in a poor environment. In general, something's not right here." "What difference does it make?" said the driver. "She wants children. Not like some people. My daughter grew up when I didn't even notice. She's already married for the 2nd time. I told her, 'When are you going to give me and your mother grandchildren?' But she just waves it off. 'We,' she says, 'want to live for ourselves, rest, see the world, and maybe we're child-free.' Have you heard of such a thing? The word itself is so disgusting. Child-free. Ugh, it's even hard to say. People have gone crazy. They're tired, they want to relax. And it's not just my Holly. There are many childless families now just because women don't want to give birth. Oh my God, where is the world going? And your patient is great. She's a real mother, or will be her." Under driver's grumbling, Neville and Charles arrived at the hospital, but they were immediately sent to a new call. Someone had an accident on the road. The duty was generally difficult, but the unhappy weeping woman, holding a doll close to her, could not get out of Neville's head. Charles was clearly upset. "Listen, what do you think will happen to her?" he asked his partner. "With Madeline?" asked Neville, although he immediately understood who Charles was talking about. "Well, as if you don't know, they'll take some tests, sedate her, check her brain for inflammations and tumours, refer her to a psychotherapist. And then, either they'll release her or close her up for a long time. Listen, let's not talk about it. It's already very heavy on the soul." "Okay." Charles nodded and fell silent too, but Neville unexpectedly interrupted the silence. "We need to visit her. She's clearly a newcomer here, living without relatives. Maybe she needs something. What can we bring to her?" "We'll find out." Charles was somehow delighted. "Let's go tomorrow and find out everything. But you know, I was distressed today when I went to see her so-called son. I've been working for the ambulance for almost 15 years. My sons are already grown up. But I can't get used to children's emergency calls. Every time I worry like it's the first time, and my heart jumps out of my chest when I see a suffering child." "I'm the same way," Neville nodded. "I guess it's our speciality as doctors. Do you know Dr. Anthony Breen, the orthopedic surgeon from our hospital?" Charles asked after a pause. "I don't know him personally, but I know there's such a person." "Yeah, him," Neville continued his story. "We've been friends for a long time. So, He's been working in the hospital for so many years, and then he calls me in the middle of the night asking me to come over because his son is sick. The boy was only 2 years old. Such a good boy. I was scared. I thought it was something serious, if Anthony couldn't handle it himself. But thank God, the boy just had a common cold. But Anthony got scared. He was standing there pale, and I said to him, "Why are you so nervous? Haven't you seen a cold before? Or is it your first year of practice?" And he replied, "I don't know. As soon as I noticed that my boy was hot and wheezing, my legs gave out. He's just a child. He's so little." "Wait, where's the child's mother?" Charles asked. "Well, it's a complicated story. His wife left him, went to the capital with some guy she met. You probably know her. Claudia, such a beautiful redhead, worked in the emergency department." "Was she really his wife?" Charles raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Yes," Neville nodded. Charles thought for a moment. He remembered Claudia very well, especially since, like everyone else, he was fascinated by her provocative beauty. Actually, he wasn't just fascinated. Once they were on duty together, and Claudia, who always accepted male attention with a benevolent smile, easily gave in to Charles. He didn't know what came over him, some kind of madness. They went to an empty utility room, but they never did it, as someone called Claudia and she had to leave. Later, she and Charles saw each other more than once, but they didn't try to get closer to each other again. They just smiled at each other in a special way, and then she quit. Charles didn't ask what had happened to her. He was already having an affair with his current wife, Hope, and flirting with Claudia had remained in the past forever. And if Neville hadn't reminded him of now, Charles would hardly have thought of Claudia himself. He remained silent for a little longer, then suddenly stirred. "Wait, did you say Anthony and Claudia have a son? But how could she abandon him?" "She didn't abandon the child," Neville explained, shrugging. "It's not hers. They didn't have any children. I'm telling you, it's a murky story. After the divorce, Anthony was upset for a long time and even started drinking. He was fired from the hospital for being absent. During that time, he met a girl who worked at a liquor store. She was from some closed settlement or something like this. I don't know exactly where she's from. At first, she sold alcohol to him, but when he started coming for bottles non-stop, she suddenly stopped. She started shaming him, telling him he was sinking to the bottom. At first he was angry, but then he started listening to her. Gradually, he got involved in a new relationship. She came to him, cleaned up the apartment, cooked, and of course it didn't go without intimacy. In short, this girl pulled Anthony out of his misery. And then her mother showed up. She saw who her daughter was living with, created a scandal and took her away. She took her back to her homestead, apparently. "And what about Anthony?" Charles asked. "Nothing," Neville replied. "He didn't know anything besides her name. I asked him how this could be, and he just shrugged and said it was so good with her, better than anyone else, and everything else seemed unimportant. He even wanted to marry her, but this girl's mother ruined everything. In short, they disappeared, and a year later, someone left a basket with a child at Anthony's door. Can you imagine? He went to the police, but they just shrugged. They wanted to put the baby boy in an orphanage, but Anthony did a DNA test and found out that it was his son. Since then, he has been raising him himself. He moved out of his rented apartment and back to his mother's apartment. She helped him for the first years. Now he lives separately from her again and has his own place with a mortgage. And when he goes on duty, Anthony's mother stays with little Ethan. She comes to visit her grandson. Wow, that's a sad story. It's good that in the end Anthony was able to rise from the bottom and return to his practice. Okay, Neville, see you around, and don't forget about Madeline." 2 weeks passed. One morning, Neville and Charles, who had once again been out on the same shift, saw a young woman waving modestly at them from a distance. She hurried to them. "Hello, Madeline," Neville smiled. "How are you feeling?" "I came to thank you for visiting me at the hospital and not leaving me in trouble, for the things that you collected for me, just for worrying. Honestly, I don't know such words of gratitude to express." "You better tell us how you are," said Charles, who was embarrassed by such praise. "Well, I'm fine now. The doctor said it was a one-time nervous breakdown. They didn't find anything wrong with me, although I had to spend a week in the hospital. Neville, Charles, don't think badly of me. I'm perfectly normal. And they really did steal my child. I came to this city to find him, and I will find him. And the nervous breakdown? You see, I was exhausted that day. I wandered around the city for a long time, and suddenly I saw a boy on the storefront, and it suddenly seemed to me that he might look like my little boy. I bought the doll and didn't take my eyes off her all evening. I cried. And then suddenly it seemed to me that he was alive and not breathing. I'm sorry that I caused a panic and even called an ambulance." "Are you feeling better now?" "Yes, thanks to you." "We're glad," Neville and Charles said in unison and laughed. "And now, excuse us, Madeline. We need to work." Yes, I'm also rushing to work. Only, guys, here, I brought you pies. This is in gratitude for what you did." "Did you bake them yourself?" Charles was somehow surprised. "Yes, I work at the pie shop on the corner of 29th Street. It's my part-time job. I am a teacher by profession, and I came to work early today to have time to prepare the pies for you." The men thanked Madeline again, took the package with the pies, and said goodbye to her, happy that everything ended well for her. The day was coming to an end when Anthony called Neville. "Hello, buddy. Listen, I have a problem. I've asked everyone, but no one can help me. And if you can't help, then it's unfortunate." "What happened?" "You see, tomorrow I start my intensive course in the medical school. I have to go, but it's for 3 days and I have no one to look after Ethan. My mother got sick. It's nothing serious, just a common sore throat, but she can't take care of the child anymore. She's lying down with a fever and coughing hard. I called everyone, but everyone had their own things to do. Ethan is a calm kid, not problematic, so I thought, can your wife take care of him? I will pay, just tell me how much." "What are you talking about?" Neville protested. "I wouldn't take any money from you. But the thing is, Mary and our daughter left yesterday to visit her parents. They've been gone for several days and won't be back until next week." "Okay, I understand. Sorry for bothering you." Anthony's voice sounded not just disappointed, but truly hopeless. "I tried to find a nanny through an ad, but they all seemed unreliable." "Listen," Neville suddenly had an idea. "I have a new acquaintance. Her name is Madeline. She's a good girl, really. She lives alone. Do you want me to talk to her and have her come over? You can see her for yourself. I think you'll like her. By the way, she's also a teacher by profession." Charles, who heard the entire conversation, widened his eyes and quickly whispered to Neville, "You're out of your mind. She just got out of the mental hospital. Can she be trusted with a child? You're taking a risk." "She is normal, Charles. I saw her eyes, and you did too. And the psychiatrist said that she's fine. Anyway, you should tell Anthony who she is," Charles said. Neville nodded. "Anthony, there's one thing, though." Anthony listened carefully, paused, and then asked, "Would you trust her with your child?" "Yes," Neville replied without hesitation. "Okay," Anthony said. "Send her over to me." Returning from another call, Neville asked the driver to turn onto 29th Street, which was not far from them. "There's a pie shop there. Can you stop for a minute, please?" The driver, a reserved 50-year-old man, wasn't used to asking unnecessary questions, and fulfilled his request without any conversation, saying only, "Oh, I know the place. Sometimes I buy donuts from them. Very delicious." They arrived at the location, and the first person Neville saw was Madeline. She was surprised to see her acquaintance, but when she understood what he was asking for, she smiled simply and openly. "Of course, give me the address, and I'll come to your friend's place at 7. Neville left all of Anthony's information and left, while Madeline, as promised, went to the address that she had written on a notebook sheet. Soon she was standing in front of the door of the needed apartment, pressing the doorbell. The door was opened quickly, but as soon as Madeline saw the man standing before her, she paled sharply and fell unconscious into his arms. Anthony picked her up and carried her to the couch, repeating her name and trying to revive her. When she opened her eyes, he asked, surprised by the unexpected visit, "How did you find me?" She burst into tears in response and said, Anthony, my mother didn't forgive me. She took me away. She wanted me to marry Damon, but I was already expecting our son. My mother screamed that I was a bad daughter, that I betrayed everyone. Everyone turned away from me. My relatives cursed me for disgracing them. They took me to a village where I gave birth to my boy, and I named him Tobias. Remember, you wanted to name our son that, and a week later my baby was stolen from me. I know my mother did it. She didn't want such a grandchild, and I was supposed to marry some old man and serve him all my life. Oh my God, Madeline!" Anthony couldn't find the words, but she continued hurriedly, gasping for breath as she told the story of her unhappy life. "Anthony, I ran away at night. The old woman who was watching me was asleep. There was a real storm outside at night, and I quietly left. I hid for a long time, didn't want to be found, and I managed to come back here. Kind people helped me. I came to your old address, and I wanted to tell you everything. I wanted you to help me find our little son, but you weren't there. But Tobias is alive. I know it. I feel it." Anthony stood up and lifted Madeline, then led her to the room where little Ethan was sleeping. "This is him!" Madeline exclaimed, reaching out to the child. "My Tobias!" "Ethan?" Anthony corrected her. "His name is Ethan. He was left at my door. This is our son. I have proof and documents." Madeline touched her son with gentle movements, but her hands shook and tears streamed down her face. "My little son, how long I've been looking for." Anthony hugged her and held her close. "Stop crying, Madeline, my good girl. I won't let you go anywhere and won't give you to anyone. Now everything will be fine with us. Let Ethan sleep a little longer and we'll go to the kitchen, have some tea and talk. We have so much more to tell each other." The next day, the happy, smiling Madeline left with Anthony and little Ethan. While Anthony worked, Madeline took care of their son, and then they walked around the city together, rested and enjoyed the happiness that had so unexpectedly returned to them. Anthony didn't forget to call Neville to thank him for everything and tell the amazing story of his love. "Anthony, I'm so happy for you," Neville said. "Your Madeline immediately seemed to me an unusual woman. Beautiful, kind, but very unhappy. Let everything be good for you. I sincerely wish you that. As soon as we return to the city, we'll immediately get married," Anthony promised, "and we will invite you and Charles to our wedding. Will you come?" "We will definitely come." Neville laughed and hurried to Charles to tell him the unexpected news. So kind and happy, and therefore very rare in our time. Happiness and love exist, and everyone needs to believe that it will eventually find everyone who deserves it. Kim was looking at old photos in the family album while talking to her mother. Her speech had notes of dissatisfaction. I just can't figure out who I look more like. Appearance-wise, everything is definite, but when it comes to my life path, I still don't have a clear vision of my future. My grandma worked as the head of a department at a medical school for many years. My grandpa was a scientific researcher, and my dad works as the chief engineer at a factory. Putting the photo album aside, Kim added, "And you, Mum, are a teacher. So, why am I working as a nominal designer in a dumpy workshop, and my boss never listened to me? It's not just that I have no plans for advancement, but the director is always picking on me. I have so many interesting ideas in my head, and I'm sure they would help improve the quality of production to a higher level. But the boss doesn't want to hear anything. He doesn't like initiative people. They seem too smart to him." Miranda sat next to her daughter, ran her hand through her hair, and said, "You know, before becoming head of department, your grandmother worked for a long time as a regular laboratory assistant. She was noticed and offered a promotion. The same with Grandpa. He didn't immediately become a famous scientific researcher. And your father, that's a whole separate topic. He started from the bottom, first as a regular fitter, then worked his way up to mechanic, and now he's the chief engineer. But you, Mum, managed to climb the career ladder in one breath. So what should I do with this atelier?" Miranda walked over to the window and asked her daughter to come to her. "Honey, pay attention to how the children play in the playground. They have a united team and all repeat the same manipulations. And if someone does it better, the children immediately adopt the experience of their neighbour." But Kim didn't quite understand the meaning of this reasoning. "Mum, let's keep it simple, without psychological tricks. Sometimes it's hard to understand you." Not to delve too deeply into the thought, the mother summed up, "Children just have a sense of unity, and it lasts a long time. Your director is an egoist, and he no longer has such notions as working together in a coordinated team. He is satisfied with the result, as long as it brings in some money, and improving the result doesn't interest him at all." Her mother was still saying something, but Kim wasn't listening to her anymore, thinking over her conclusions. She decided that if she was a good professional and not appreciated, she would not try to impose and knock on a closed door, and just continue to work as an ordinary seamstress. But if a better option presented itself, she wouldn't miss it. She was distracted from her thoughts by her father, who had returned from work. "Hello, my dears. This weekend we're going to our friends. They invited us to organise a picnic together. I think it's not a bad idea, especially since we haven't been in nature for a long time." Miranda gestured to her daughter that they could continue the conversation later. "Of course, dear. I fully support your idea." Kim had no other plans for the weekend, so she agreed to come with them too. The next day, the girl arrived at the atelier a little earlier than usual and didn't immediately go to her workplace. She wanted to talk to Mr. Brady, her boss, once again. Even after talking to her mother and receiving hints about unity, Kim still hoped to show initiative. The owner of the atelier arrived later than usual, and seeing Kim at the threshold of his office, asked, "What are you doing here? If it's about money, the salary was paid last week, and don't expect any advance payment. You haven't earned it yet." These words offended Kim, but she held back to avoid saying anything unnecessary. No, Mr. Brady, I'm here not because of money. I just thought we could use the ideas I mentioned last time. I think the atelier will only benefit from it." Mr. Brady frowned and replied, "I know what we need, and your original ideas don't interest me at all. By the way, I am a technologist by education, so you don't need to teach your director." It was another frustrating remark that Kim also endured. She wasn't used to swearing. "Well, okay, Mr. Brady, you know best. Sorry for taking your precious time." And she silently sat down at her workplace. Throughout the day, Kim tried not to look at anyone. She understood that people were gossiping behind her back, but she had immunity for such cases. Her grandmother often took her to medical school, and there, when she spoke to the audience, she sat her granddaughter next to her, as if a faithful assistant. So Kim had been long accustomed to being the centre of attention. Remembering this, Kim drove away the gloomy thoughts. The end of the working day was approaching. Everyone began to gather, but suddenly a woman flew into the atelier like a meteor. She was wearing expensive clothes and had several exquisite gold rings on her fingers. Moreover, a gorgeous bracelet made of precious metal adorned her left wrist. Kim thought this was another boss's girlfriend, but no, when Mr. Brady came to her, she began to scold and shout at him in front of everyone. "I asked you not to skimp on the material. Don't you understand me at all? I'll punish you once with money, then you'll understand that this is no joke." After this, thoughts of a girlfriend fell off by themselves. Kim guessed that this woman was a regular and very valuable client. At least, she knew Mr. Brady well enough to allow such eccentric outbursts. Mr. Brady lowered his head like a guilty schoolboy. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Hobbs, I'll fix everything. The thing is, I'm catastrophically short of qualified specialists," excused the director, and took the client to his office. What a crafty fox he is. Kim puffed up her cheeks with anger. "He says there are no good employees, but he rejected all my suggestions. I need to remind him of this again." In addition to her thoughts on another conversation with the director, Kim suddenly realized that the client was not so simple. Despite her behavior, she was full of dignity and confidence in their rightness. It was clear that the woman, Mrs. Hobbs, knew exactly what she could demand and when it was better to keep quiet. And she was probably an excellent clothing designer. Judging by her stylish appearance and expensive jewellery, she was at least the owner of a modelling agency. Most likely, Kim would be able to come to an agreement with her by offering original ideas. After 20 minutes, Mrs. Hobbs left Mr. Brady's office. He looked out after her, and his face was a deep shade of red, and sweat was pouring down his forehead. Apparently, it was hard for him to endure all of her reproaches and criticisms. Turning her head as if examining new possessions, Mrs. Hobbs left the studio. Just in case, Kim looked to see what car she had come in. An expensive black fancy car was parked in the yard. It was clear that the woman was wealthy. In her thoughts, Kim was already looking forward to presenting her new clothing samples to her. But these were just dreams. When she got home, she decided to consult her mother. "So what do you think, Mum? Am I doing the right thing if I show initiative to her?" Miranda crossed her hands on her lap and replied, "I wouldn't rush to make hasty decisions. You yourself said that your director doesn't like initiative people. But what if you ended up being the fall guy? On the other hand, he who does not risk does not drink champagne." Kim took note of her mother's warning, but she still wanted to test her persistence in action. There was silence in the atelier for almost a week. The wealthy client did not appear, and Mr. Brady looked darker than a cloud. He felt as if he was driven into a certain framework and was not at rest. And although he knew perfectly well that Kim could become his indispensable assistant, he used to do everything as he saw fit and refused any new ideas. Kim had already decided that Mrs. Hobbs would not visit them again, but on Monday morning, the woman visited once again. After a wonderful weekend with her family at a picnic, Kim did not really want to spoil her mood. However, curiosity got the better of her, and she decided to approach Mrs. Hobbs. The woman was trying to figure something out from Mr. Brady near the racks of clothes. "When have you been asked to send an order?" "Did you listen to me, Mr. Brady? Maybe it's time to pay you less or even change the atelier. Sorry, but my sales deadlines are being missed, and I really don't want to be embarrassed in front of serious people later. In general, correct your mistakes, and finally, find a good designer." The cherished word for Kim was spoken. She flew towards Mrs. Hobbs like a bird, but stopped abruptly halfway. At that moment, the woman took one of the finished items in her hands. "And what's this? Whose hands did this mess come from? What kind of incompetent people are working for you here? Mr. Brady, why are you silent? Answer." Kim saw that Mrs. Hobbs was holding the dress she had been working on for a long time. Her mind became cloudy, and instead of finding out what Mrs. Hobbs didn't like about the dress, Kim blurted out, "How dare you judge a person just by looking at their work? This dress is my creation, and I don't think there are any flaws in it." Kim was on the edge and wanted to continue, but to defuse the situation, Mr. Brady firmly grabbed her elbow and led her to his office. Before climbing the stairs, the woman discreetly put Kim's dress in her purse and shouted, "Don't overdo it, Mr. Brady. I'll come back to you later." Kim didn't understand what this could mean, but there was no time to think on distracted topics, because a serious conversation with the boss was ahead of her. Half an hour later, Kim was standing in front of her boss. Mr. Brady started without closing the door. "Do you realize who you're dealing with? You just insulted a wealthy client. I'm already walking on eggshells in front of her, and you've created a scene. So, you're fired, and I don't want to see you here again. And, by the way, I don't think you'll get a job in another atelier. I'll make sure that you never get a job as designer in our city." Kim left the office and only then started crying. She didn't want the director to see her tears and make fun of her even more. An hour later, she was home. "Mum, I got fired, just like you warned me. I should have stayed out of it with my advice, and why don't I ever listen to you?" Miranda approached her daughter and hugged her. "Don't worry, my dear. This isn't the last atelier in the area. There are many firms where your abilities can be useful. You'll see that fate will give you a second chance." Kim weakly believed in these comforting words and started looking for a new job the next day. She was ashamed to look at her parents in the eye. Her father had been working in the same place for 20 years, and her mother was constantly dealing with clients. And only their daughter had shown herself in a bad light. The director dismissed her out of the atelier with a paltry severance pay, and on parting, he sarcastically said, "Have a good trip, but not silk, but with spools, so you can collect all the bumps." Kim went to interviews all week, but was rejected everywhere. Interestingly enough, they didn't explain the reason for the refusal, and the girl suspected that Mr. Brady was behind it. Mrs. Hobbs probably had a hand in it too. In any case, Kim had no other theories yet. But she had no intention of going to the former director, though she still wanted to settle the score with Mrs. Hobbs. However, Kim didn't know where to find her. While thinking about how to compensate for her losses, Kim suddenly came up with the idea that she really wanted to get back at Mrs. Hobbs. But it was out of the question because Revenge doesn't justify bad deeds. In addition, Kim's mother advised her to forget this misunderstanding and move on with her life. Soon, Kim was able to find remote work, creating clothing patterns for a capital atelier. Although it wasn't much of an income, now it was better than nothing. 3 weeks had passed since she quit. Mr. Brady sometimes saw her in the city, but he didn't approach her. One day, a familiar black car pulled up to Kim's house. The girl looked out the window and almost screamed. "It's Mrs. Hobbs herself! Who has arrived? She wants to humiliate me here too. Well, now I'll tell her what I think of her." Running out into the street, Kim ran up to the car and kicked the tire, shouting, "Why did you come here? Isn't my shame in front of the atelier director enough for you? I was fired because of it, and now you want to trample me here too?" In response, Mrs. Hobbs handed her the very dress she had rejected before. "This is your work as far as I remember, and I'm not going to humiliate you, Kim. On the contrary, I would like to offer you a job as a designer in my company. As you may have guessed, I own a private modelling agency. I work only with wealthy and successful people in our city and neighbouring regions, a very narrow circle of clients. Also, I have a network of stores for selling clothing, tailoring and repair. And in Mr. Brady's atelier, I am a co-founder. But because of my workload in my main line of work, I never strictly monitored his work. And if you want to be my right-hand person, then welcome aboard." Kim's joy was boundless, and she instantly forgot that a moment ago she had been furious with Mrs. Hobbs. "I am flattered by your offer, but what about the dress that you rejected? I had been working on it for a whole week." Mrs. Hobbs smiled and said, "You rushed to conclusions when you attacked me. At that moment, I wanted to scold Mr. Brady for his careless attitude towards our partnership, and your work fell into my hands. But in reality, I really liked your dress, and I got curious who created such a masterpiece. That's why I am here with a job offer." Here, Kim felt her cheeks turning red. "I'm sorry, but my emotions overwhelmed me. By the way, what about the atelier? If Mr. Brady finds out that I've joined you, he won't let me work in peace." Mrs. Hobbs looked at the girl meaningfully and replied, "You'll see everything tomorrow. I haven't told you the main thing yet, but that's later. I'll pick you up tomorrow morning." Surprisingly, the black car was parked outside the house again at 8 o'clock in the morning. With alarm and nervous excitement, Kim got into the car. Together, they arrived at the modelling agency. The first introduction to the staff was successful. "Well, there's nothing to worry about. You were accepted normally. Now, I'll show you your office." Kim could only dream of such a thing. A separate workplace, and even a view from the window of the business centre was simply wonderful. For 2 hours, Mrs. Hobbs explained the intricacies of working at the agency to Kim. A little later, they got back in the car, and Mrs. Hobbs said, "And now, let's go visit Mr. Brady. I think he will be happy to see a new business partner. By the way, you look great. Did you make the suit yourself or buy it?" "I designed it, and then the tailor sewed it to my specifications." Half an hour later, they arrived at the atelier. "Come in, you won't get lost here. It hasn't been that long since you were fired," Mrs. Hobbs joked. Mr. Brady was shocked when Mrs. Hobbs introduced him to her new protégé. Kim would supervise all orders from now on. "And look, Mr. Brady, she won't let you off the hook. I put up with you, but I think Kim will put you in your place quickly. I know what she's capable of." The director suddenly turned red and retreated to his office. On the way, he told Kim about the successes they had achieved in the last month. The figures were not that impressive, but Kim firmly stated that she would put things in order. After that, Mr. Brady did not accept any orders without her approval. Sometimes Kim remembered her mother's words about unity and told herself mentally, not all people behave arrogantly when in charge. And she was right, because Mrs. Hobbs never spoke to her as if Kim were not an employee, but rather the company's property. Thank you for listening, and have a nice day. Daniel's mother could not believe that her son was divorcing Eden. From her point of view, this marriage was perfect. She had known Eden since childhood. The girl was the only daughter of wealthy parents. Her father was the chief engineer of a factory, and her mother was a doctor. From childhood, Eden had everything, but all this did not spoil the girl. She grew up very goal-oriented, and she always knew what she wanted. That's the kind of wife you need, his mother convinced Daniel back then. Life is hard now, and with Eden you'll never be in trouble. She's a smart, beautiful girl, not like your Kelly. Kelly's family lived next door. Her father used to drink, and her mother worked 2 jobs. On chance encounters, Kelly, quiet as a mouse, always looked at Daniel with such bright and amorous eyes that the boy involuntarily smiled back at her. At such moments, Kelly seemed to him an extraordinary beauty. Daniel saw how tiny and thin Kelly was, and he always wanted to give her a shoulder to lean on. At first, he just talked to the young neighbour, then he began to visit her, and then the time came when they became inseparable. That was when Daniel's mother started to worry. She was friends with Eden's parents and thought that her son had every chance of having an affair with a decent girl. Of course, it would not be difficult for Eden to find a more promising groom, but Daniel was a handsome, tall guy. He was a college student, he didn't smoke, did not drink, and was very decent. Knowing all these virtues of her son, the woman thought he should fight for Eden. "Why should I be interested in her?" exclaimed Daniel. "I won't find better than Kelly. She'll graduate this year, and we'll—" Daniel's mother hastily interrupted her son and tried to move the conversation to another topic, because there was nothing more terrible for her than the words, "and we'll get married." And then after graduation, Kelly suddenly disappeared. At first her mother said she had gone to visit a girlfriend for a month or 2, and then she proudly informed Daniel that her daughter had enrolled in a high-profile college. "She's in the philological department." She said the unfamiliar words almost syllable for syllable. "Don't bother her. Let her study in peace. Her whole fate now depends on her studies." Deep down, Daniel was shocked that Kelly had left him unexpectedly. Of course he wouldn't interfere with her studies, and they could call and text each other and meet on vacations. But Kelly had decided to break up with him. She changed her phone number, deleted her social media pages, and her mother resolutely refused to share any information with Daniel. The man was so offended by all of this that he gave in to his mother's persuasion and agreed to court Eden. The young man had no trouble getting the young beauty to like him, only it was unclear who was courting whom, because Eden always knew exactly what she wanted, what her plans were, and she made decisions for 2. "Today we're going to the beach," she used to inform Daniel. "Then we'll have lunch at a cafe, and in the evening my journalist friends are having a great party." She has never asked if Daniel is happy with her outlined plan, or if he wants to accompany her. To be fair, Daniel didn't mind. Eden's acquaintances were interesting people, and all sorts of exhibitions and concerts that the girl chose really deserved attention. Their own wedding, Eden also planned perfectly. "Let's get married before the new year and go to the Emirates. I looked out for such a nice hotel there, like an Oriental palace, and the sea is just a few steps away." Daniel didn't even have to say that it was too expensive. The wedding trip was paid by Eden's parents, who had decided to do everything to make it memorable for the young couple. Eden went to work at a pre-arranged place, especially for her. The position of deputy director for social issues was created. Daniel became an art director in one of the city cultural centres. Life was intense. The spouses rarely spent evenings at home. When Daniel had no events, they were always going somewhere. If not for a play, then for a party. If not to the gym, then to a restaurant. Daniel did not admit to anyone that he longed for those quiet evenings when he and Kelly would drink tea in the kitchen and talk about the most intimate things. When they could turn on a movie, get under the same blanket, and enjoy the fact that they were near each other, that it was raining outside the window, and that tomorrow was Sunday, and there was no hurry anywhere. In general, Daniel's mother thought that her son had made a wonderful choice, but there was something that saddened the woman. "I wish I had a grandson or granddaughter," she used to say. "I'm not getting any younger. In the summer, I'd take the baby to my summer cottage. You'd go on vacation." "No, no, no," objected Eden, not directly to her mother-in-law, but later to Daniel. "These old people always say that they are ready to babysit their grandchildren, but in reality, they will come to visit, give a toy, and that's it. They have illnesses, summer houses, friends. They want to relax. As a result, we will run out of quiet life. It's not for nothing that my mother barely agreed to have one child, and when I was born she swore no one else, ever. I don't know if I'll ever want to have babies either." Daniel understood even in this matter no one would ask his opinion, and one day he realized that he was tired. He was just tired of everything in the world, of this planned life, of his wife's inflexible character, of a house that was not really his home. And then he suddenly announced to his wife that he was filing for divorce. Eden was taken aback. For the first time in their family life, her husband did not want to discuss the problem, did not agree to see a psychologist, ignored the arguments of her parents. He just lay on the couch and with his hands behind his head, to all her exhortations to him, said that he was fed up with everything and had already decided. In the end, Eden could not stand it. "Well, at least we don't have a baby," she said sarcastically. "I was right. How would I explain to the baby now that his daddy's just sick of everything?" Along with the divorce papers, Daniel got a certain amount of money. It was a sort of payoff. If there was anything Eden and her parents were grateful for, it was that Daniel decided not to divide the property. Everything was left to his ex-wife. Daniel packed his bag, drove to the train station, and went far away from here. The man was sure that he would not be unemployed in another state. And indeed, Daniel found a job fairly quickly. Soon he opened his own holiday agency, and even his mother came to terms with the fact that her son had made such a sharp turn in his fate. One day, his agency received an order for a birthday greeting for a 6-year-old boy on Christmas Eve, but there was not a single available animator in the agency. Daniel was about to refuse the order, but imagining how on Christmas Eve the boy's father and mother would be calling other agencies and would hear that they had been late, he decided not to upset the boy. "Okay, I'll shake off the old days," thought Daniel, and pulled out his Batman costume. The house he arrived at looked like a fairy tale. Everything around the house was decorated. There was a big, fluffy Christmas tree in the yard. When Daniel rang the bell and the door opened, a little boy, surprisingly similar to Daniel as a child, appeared before his eyes. The same blue eyes, the upturned nose, even the same facial expression as he remembered from his childhood pictures. "Oh, we are happy to see you," the boy's mother greeted Daniel. Daniel averted his eyes from the child. who was jumping for joy and looked at his mother, froze in shock. It was Kelly. She had changed a lot. Now she was no longer a shy, quiet girl, but a mature woman. And yet it was his Kelly. Daniel could not help but recognize the one he had been thinking about every day for all these years. It took Daniel a tremendous effort to pull himself together, but he played the entire program. At the end, he announced to the boy that since he had performed all the tasks so well, read poetry and guessed riddles, he would certainly grow up to be a superhero too. Daniel handed the boy a gift, which Kelly discreetly gave him, and the happy child ran to his room. "Would you like some tea?" Kelly suggested. "Thank you. Only if your son sees that I took my mask off, there will be great disappointment." "You're right," laughed Kelly. "Let's go to the kitchen. We can sit there quietly. He will be playing now with his gift, so he has no time for us." Daniel took off his mask, standing in the kitchen doorway. "Come in, sit down at the table," said Kelly, taking the cake out of the refrigerator. Looking at Daniel without the mask, she gasped. Her hands trembled so much that she had to hastily put the cake on the table. "How did you find us?" she muttered. "I had no idea who I had come to," answered Daniel quietly. "Probably it is a miracle, because it is Christmas Eve today, and your son—" He did not dare to continue. "I guess tea won't be enough for us," said Kelly. "But I don't have anything strong, just a bottle of champagne. Let's open it, and I'll tell you everything." It turned out that almost 7 years ago, she hadn't made any plans at all to start a new life and go to a college. After graduation, she was going to tell Daniel that she was expecting a baby. Kelly had a dream that they would have a quiet wedding, live together, she would raise the baby, devote all her time to him while her husband worked. But Daniel's mother came to her. Kelly was confused because the woman she had already thought of as her future mother-in-law was visiting her for the first time in her life. But what Kelly heard was not at all what she was expecting. "You see, every boy has his first girl in life, but in fact, Daniel feels sorry for you. He sees how poor you and your parents live. Eden is the best option for him. He will have an entirely different life with her. You don't want him to go out with you out of pity, do you? You're not going to drown his future in this swamp of yours, are you?" Kelly confessed that she had never had a more difficult moment in her life than this conversation. She cried all night, and in the morning she packed her things and left for her cousin, who had been living in this city for 5 years. Then the baby was born. Kelly graduated in philology, and now she works remotely at a publishing house, translating books and renting this house. "I can never forgive my mother for that," said Daniel, clenching his fists. "Don't say that." Kelly smiled tiredly. "Even I have forgiven. The main thing is that nothing irreparable has happened, and I gave birth to Benny. He's a wonderful boy, but sometimes it is hard to raise him." "It will be easier now," said Daniel in a confident voice. "We'll have to catch up on everything we've missed over the years because of me, but we won't part again." Kelly, looking him straight in his eyes, squeezed his hand and smiled. The woman didn't know if they would be able to become a family after all these years, but right now she was happy.
Patrick looked down at the dirt on his usually pristine shoes and wrinkled his nose in disgust. "What is this dump?" he exclaimed, turning to his companion Arthur. "Where did you bring me?" "This is not a dump, my dear, but a fully functioning settlement," laughed Arthur. "Come on, are you trying to say that people live here?" Patrick was still surprised. "Well, yes, and there, by the way, is one of the locals. Would you like to get to know him better?" Patrick turned his head and to his surprise saw an older man who looked like the most ordinary homeless person. He was wearing old, heavily worn clothes, his unkempt, tangled threads barely resembling hair, and a bruise on his dark, dirty face. "Is he really coming towards us?" Patrick arched his eyebrows disdainfully. "I hope he's not contagious or lousy. These tramps can have anything. Arthur, I beg you, tell him not to come any closer. Why did we come to this flea pit?" "Oh, stop it," laughed Arthur. "They're almost all like this here. And we need this land to belong to your company. Now, we'll take a look around, draw some conclusions. We'll make a rough plan, and let this scarecrow not bother you. Well, he walks and walks. The road is free. Maybe he's going to a bottle. You won't find anyone here but bums and old men, and old women anyway. We'll have to come here more than once if we want to buy this land. Arthur, where did you see a person here? This is just a parody of a person and nothing more." At that moment, the stranger approached them and smiled upon hearing Patrick's words. "You're mistaken, my dear. I'm a person, just like you. Look, I have hands, legs, torso, head and heart, and a soul too. And I would never allow myself to humiliate anyone." "I don't understand." Patrick interrupted him, turning to his companion. "Is this tramp trying to teach me life? I've lived long enough." "Well, you see, Patrick," laughed Arthur, "you used to complain to me about being bored at the office. And now look how many impressions you've had in the last 20 minutes. The homeless man smiled. "So you're Patrick. Well, I'm Ron. That's what everyone calls me here." "What?" Patrick and Arthur exchanged glances. "Ron? Well, nice to meet you, Ron," Patrick said seriously. "Now, Ron, go away, please. You see, we're busy. What are you looking at? Do you want money?" "Well, who refuses money?" Ron nodded in agreement. "Go ahead if you don't mind, but I do not understand what kind of business you do. You're standing on the road looking around. I thought you came here to breathe fresh air." Patrick grimaced. "What kind of fresh air can there be next to you? I'm telling you, get out of here. You're ruining the whole picture for us." Ron cautiously took a few bills that Patrick handed him, and clutching them tightly in his hand, hurried away, shaking his head and muttering something under his breath. "No, did you see that?" Patrick nodded at his receding figure. "No thank you or goodbye." "Okay, Arthur, let's get down to business. Get out your notebook." They spent more than half an hour before they got in the car and left the village, talking excitedly about how much money they would have to invest in the paperwork and, in general, to tear down and rebuild everything there. Until the evening, Patrick was thinking about a new project, but when Lynette burst into his office, everything was upside down. "Thank you, darling," she shouted. "I had been waiting for you the whole evening, and you're just sitting there staring at your screen." "Lynette," Patrick smiled at his passionate fiancée, whom he had grown accustomed to in their year and a half of dating. "I'm sorry, I'm really busy. So many problems have piled." "What?" She slumped into the chair opposite him. "Do you have problems in your business? And how long have you had them?" "Well, there aren't any special problems," replied Patrick. "I'm just a bit busy, that's all." "So you're busy enough to forget about our dinner at the restaurant, are you? I understand I was wrong, but don't be angry and forgive me." Patrick conciliated, taking her hand. "Let me call and book a table right now. Where would you like to go?" Without hesitation, Lynette named the most expensive restaurant in the city. Patrick frowned. He didn't like its pomp. "Why there specifically?" he asked. Let's choose somewhere simpler. Oh, come on, Lynette snapped. The pizzeria around the corner? What's wrong with that? It's quite a decent place, said Patrick. We all go there for lunch. Are you serious? Lynette raised her eyebrows incredulously, and Patrick laughed. Okay, let's go to a restaurant. He gave up, finally. They had a great time, so Patrick was very surprised when Arthur approached him the next day and slapped him on the shoulder. Listen, Patrick, I've always been good to you. You know that. We were friends with your late father, and he asked me to help you with everything. Arthur, you're scaring me, said Patrick. What happened? Well, I'm uncomfortable telling you this, but Lynette called me this morning and asked about the state of your business. She seems to think you're bankrupt, and she's wondering if she should spend time on you if that's the case. You said you were getting married in the fall. I'm sorry, Patrick, I'm not used to poking my nose into other people's personal lives, but you're like a son to me, so I can't keep quiet. Acting like this, Lynette didn't show herself in the best light. She's with you as long as you're on top, but if something happens, she'll quickly leave you. Do you understand what I'm talking about? Yes, I understand, said Patrick thoughtfully, and Arthur continued. You see, I'll be 60 soon, and I know this life better than you do. Women like Lynette are good for meaningless encounters, but creating a family with them is a foolish mistake for men. My Helen and I have been through fire, water, and copper pipes. We've lived in wealth and poverty, tested each other in different situations, and now I can say with confidence that I'm very lucky with my wife. She's never let me down, no matter what happened in my life. So here's the thing. I want you to be happy when you reach my age, too. Do you understand? I understand. Patrick nodded again. I'll think about what you said. Yes, think about it. Oh, and one more thing. Another contender has appeared for your project. In general, competitors don't rest. Keep that in mind. This conversation left an unpleasant feeling in Patrick's soul. He had never been deluded about Lynette, but he was attracted to her ease, beauty, and ability to give him pleasure. Patrick had never imagined her in casual clothes with a child in her arms, or even in the kitchen. It was strange. He was going to marry this girl because it seemed like a natural result of their relationship. But what then? They had never lived together except for those periods when they went on vacation. Those situations were entirely different. These thoughts did not give Patrick peace, and he could not get them out of his head. He decided not to say anything to Lynette and just observe her. However, she did not notice his mood, preferring dinners in restaurants and hanging out with her friends in clubs. 2 days later, Patrick completely forgot about the homeless man he met in the settlement, but somehow he ran into him on the steps of his own office one morning. "Patrick!" exclaimed Ron, grabbing him by the sleeve. "I was just looking for you." Patrick squeamishly pulled his hand away. "Who are you anyway?" "Don't you recognize me?" Ron was sincerely surprised. "It's me, Ron. You know, it didn't go well back then. You gave me money and I didn't even thank you. I was in a hurry, you see. But now I found you deliberately to say thank you." "Ah, yes, I remember," Patrick said. "Although you look even worse now. Who gave you one more black eye?" "Oh, I just fell," said the homeless man. "Funny, it's hard to believe," Patrick chuckled. "Well, Ron, you thanked me, and I'm thrilled about it. And now, get lost. God forbid anyone sees me next to you." "Do you think still I'm not human?" Ron sighed. "What did you expect?" Patrick unexpectedly got angry. "Look at yourself. What kind of a person are you? You're begging, you're unwashed and unkempt, in some rags. You have a black eye on half of your face. And you eat what you find in the trash. Yuck! Disgusting. Do normal people live like this? And I'll tell you, Ron, soon there won't be anything left of your cockroach-infested shack. I'll build an elite cottage settlement there. and you get ready, like cockroaches, to scatter in all directions. Human? You're just a bum. Before you judge me, Pat, Ron said quietly, walk in my shoes. Feel what it's like when your loved ones turn away from you, judge you, when the whole world crumbles under your feet, and the ones you counted on laugh at you and drive you away. You know, Patrick, when it happened to me, I saw people without masks for the first time and realized who's worth what. But why am I telling you this? I bet you wouldn't last even a couple of days in the conditions I and everyone else live in. I wish I had something to bet on. I have no money, just like you have no conscience. You'll destroy our settlement? Well, we're used to it. We're being driven out from everywhere, and you're just like everyone else, there too, judging us. And anyway, I came to you with good intentions, to say thank you. And you, Ron waved his hand and walked away. But Patrick suddenly called out to him, and then caught up with him. You said let's bet. I agree. Let's make a bet. But I told you I have no money, Ron said. We'll do it like this. If I live in your conditions for 2 days, you'll gather your brothers and take them away from the settlement so that I don't even see them. And if I lose, I'll give you money. A lot. 20,000. Do we have a deal? 50, Ron said. Are you getting bold? Patrick smiled. Well, let it be 50. Sorry, we won't shake hands. I don't want to get dirty. Anyway, wait for me in your settlement tomorrow morning. I'll come and we'll start. Arthur couldn't help but cry out in astonishment when Patrick told him about his idea. I don't understand why you need to do this, he said, and I don't advise you to get involved in this mess. You know, you can fall rapidly, but to rise, that's a different story. Exactly, Patrick agreed. That's what I want. Not to fall, of course. I just want to see people from the inside. Ron, the homeless man, inspired me with this idea. And while I'm gone, could you please keep an eye on things for me? I trust you. I don't like this idea, Patrick. What if someone recognizes you? Aren't you afraid of damaging your reputation? No, it's not serious. Just boyish nonsense. Arthur, I've already made up my mind, and I don't like to go back on my decisions. You know me. I do, Patrick. You're just like your father. But I can't support this idea of yours, I'm sorry. Patrick spent a lot of time persuading Arthur to help him. Then he went to a second-hand shop, bought clothes and shoes, and arrived in the settlement by taxi the next morning. Homeless people from all over the city often gathered here, as empty housing could be found here, albeit cold, but at least with a roof over your head. Patrick thought that no one would object if he also spent a couple of days here. But as soon as he appeared on the narrow street, 4 vagrants came out of the alley to meet him. "Who are you?" asked one of them, looking at Patrick through bushy eyebrows. "What are you doing here?" "Nothing," Patrick replied calmly. "I lost my home. My wife threw me out. Now I'm homeless. I want to live here with you." "You don't look much like a homeless person," smirked the second vagrant. "You're too clean. Your haircut is neat. You've recently shaved." "That's what I'm saying," Patrick began to explain. "Everything was fine with me until—" But he didn't have time to finish because the first one interrupted him. "So you decided to live here? Did you get registered?" "Registration?" Patrick was surprised. "Yes. If not, we'll register you ourselves." The third vagrant laughed and immediately dealt Patrick a crushing blow that knocked him to the ground. They beat Patrick for a long time, or at least that's how it seemed to him. Then, when he passed out, they went through his pockets and took his documents a little money that he brought with him, and a button phone he bought specifically for this adventure. After thinking for a while, they took off Patrick's clothes and left, taking them with him. The cold quickly did its work, and Patrick regained consciousness. He struggled to get up, but immediately fell back into the mud. He suddenly heard someone scream next to him. Patrick, shaking with pain and cold, turned his head and saw a poorly dressed woman of about 35 in front of him. "Oh my God, who did this to you?" she exclaimed, waving her hands. "You can't stay here, you'll freeze. Let me help you up and take you to my place. It's nearby. Here, look." She pointed somewhere to the side. Patrick wanted to smile with his broken lips, but couldn't, and only winced from a new wave of pain. The woman understood this in her own. "Don't be afraid. I live there with my son Teddy, who's 5 years old. And my name is Carrie. It's just the two of us, no one else. No one will hurt you anymore. Come on, let's get up. Quietly. Lean on me. That's right. Good. What's your name?" "Patrick," he murmured, not recognizing his own hoarse voice. In the tiny cottage house, a little boy was lying on the bed, looking frightened at the beaten, dirty man his mother had brought in. Carrie gently helped Patrick lie down on an old, saggy couch and began to carefully wipe his face and body with warm water from a bowl. "Call an ambulance," the man asked. "I think my ribs are broken." "No one will come here," she sighed, covering him with a blanket. "When they hear our address, they hang up the phone. Teddy is sick too, but even with a high fever, they won't take him. They say we are outcasts. Last winter, I carried him to the hospital, and in the middle of the night, and they didn't want to take us in. They gave him a shot and kicked us out." Patrick listened to her story in disbelief. Finally, he said, "I need a phone. I'll call and they'll come for me. Do you have one? Mine was stolen." Carrie shook her head. "I don't have a phone. If I need one, I go to Tom. He has one." Patrick dictated Arthur's number to her and asked her to tell him he was waiting for him there. Carrie left and returned quickly. "I'm sorry, but your friend was taken to the hospital this morning with a heart attack." "That's what they told me." Patrick sat up sharply and screamed in acute pain. Carrie helped him lie down. "Please call my fiancée. Her name is Lynette." Carrie silently nodded, wrote down the number and headed for the door again. "I delivered your message," she said, returning. "And now let me feed you. And Teddy needs to eat too." Patrick didn't feel hungry, so he declined, but he watched as the boy ate pea soup and pearl barley oatmeal from his place. "Why do you live here? And what about your son? Can't he get up?" Patrick couldn't help asking. "He can, but he's very weak. He needs a complete examination to know what's wrong with him, and that takes money. One good person promised to help me, but I don't know if it will work out. We live here because my husband's family kicked us out. I got married at 25 and he was 20. We loved each other, but his family never accepted me. Even the years we spent together didn't change their minds. And then Sergei died. He fell off the balcony. Everyone blamed me and took me to court. I was pregnant then. My husband and I wanted this child very much, but he never saw him. I gave birth to Teddy in prison. And then, suddenly, I was acquitted. New circumstances of the case were revealed. It turned out that Teddy gambled away everything we had, and the apartment too. So he found an easy way to get rid of all the problems." Carrie sighed, paused, then continued. "I'm an English teacher and translator by education, but with a criminal record, no one wanted to hire me, especially with a baby in my arms. I ended up on the street. One kind person helped me and brought me here. Recently, He brought money for Teddy's medicine and food. I saw him just now, and he promised to help you too." As Carrie spoke, the front door slammed shut and a young, beautiful girl appeared in the doorway. "Lynette!" Patrick exclaimed happily. "How good you came for me." She looked closely at his battered face and said, "So, it's true. You're broke now. Patrick, how could you deceive me? I trusted you, and I wanted to be your wife." "Lynette, you've got it all wrong. I'll marry you, but right now I need your help. Take me to the hospital and give me some money. I want to pay off this woman." "Money?" Lynette shouted. "Do I owe you money? You've sunk so low in just a few days. You're nobody now, and I came here just because I wanted to see everything with eyes. Don't you dare come near me. Got it? You're nothing." Saying this, she turned to leave, but then she bumped into a homeless man. She screamed in disgust and ran away, while the man turned to Patrick and smiled. "Well, hello, Patrick. I didn't expect to see you like this." "Ron," Patrick whispered and felt the blush of shame spread across his face. "I'm sorry. As you can see now, I'm a nobody too. And it happened very quick." "Stop it. We'll help you. You won't stay here. I think you already understand the lesson." "I understand." Patrick nodded and a tear rolled down his cheek for the first time since he was a child. An hour later, Ron brought Patrick to the hospital. A couple of Patrick's ribs were indeed broken, and he had to spend more time in the clinic than he had expected. Lynette never visited him, and he didn't want to see her either. But when he was discharged, he immediately came to visit Ron. "So, Ron, I brought you the money as promised. You won the bet. Congratulations," he said. "Give the money to Carrie. I didn't intend to take it for myself. I wanted to help her. She needs to get her son back on his feet. I'll help Carrie anyway, and you can use this money to get yourself a place to live, fix yourself up, and come to me if you want a job." Ron nodded happily and extended his hand for a handshake, but then withdrew it, remembering that Patrick didn't like it. But Patrick took his hand and shook it firmly. "And also, my friend, thank you for the lesson." "What will happen to our settlement?" Ron asked Patrick. "I'll demolish it, as promised. Arthur, my friend and partner, has already been discharged from the hospital, and I introduced him to a new project. Here we will build a medical centre and a pension for all those in need. The place and space will allow us to do this. In addition, the city authorities approved my decision and I won the tender, leaving behind the main competitor. In short, very soon, I will be able to provide jobs and housing for everyone who wants it. And your son, Carrie, is awaited at the best children's clinic in the country. Everything is paid for. Don't worry." Carrie, crying, threw herself into Patrick's arms. She was deeply grateful to him for what he had done. 6 months passed. The construction of the medical centre was in full swing. Ron worked at the construction site, and Carrie, who returned home with her recovering son, thanks to Patrick's help, got him into a good kindergarten and started working in a canteen where all the construction workers ate. She lived in a small apartment on the outskirts of the city, which Patrick rented for her for a couple of years, and didn't know how to thank her benefactor. And Patrick was simply happy. Lynette tried many times to reconcile with him, but he had already met another girl, the future doctor of his clinic, and he knew exactly what true love was.